Welcome all of the current members of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Public Safety, and soon the former members will be joining us. No, I'm just joking. You guys are well aware that a number of our committee members have other responsibilities and are spread around the Capitol today. So we appreciate everyone being here. Oh, I'm looking around for Kendra. So we will let Kendra call our order. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Some of you may have heard my brief comments as we started through some of the public safety agencies, Department of Corrections, Public Safety, GBI, Juvenile Justice, and Pardons and Parole on Tuesday. This is not an easy budget to be in. We're going to talk about things in many agencies that will present to us today already have looked at cuts and looked at ways to help us get to where we need in this current budget cycle, and we appreciate that. Let me say that in advance. We're going to be asking you to look at those things further. Nobody likes to talk about furloughs. Nobody likes to talk about the program cuts that have been suggested that you've been asked to submit, and the governor has taken you up on some of them and suggested others. Nobody likes to do that. But I'll reiterate what I did on Tuesday. 7,000 people at Home Depot, I believe, woke up Wednesday morning without a place to go to work. And our goal is to keep delivering the services to the citizens of Georgia that they need, and our goal is that we don't have to do that through a reduction in force. But a citizen walked in the other day into my office just out of nowhere and said that they couldn't understand how people kept talking about furloughs as a short-term solution, and they were unacceptable or unpalatable or didn't want to be considered. That if they didn't want to consider that, they should just think about the long-term solution was a reduction in force, and people lost their jobs, and that's what had happened to them. And I think we all have to keep that in mind. I don't want to y'all are out there with it every day and with these people that are very valuable to Georgia. But help us. It's a tight situation. I don't know if you're aware. I don't know if it made the news. I actually got an email from my office last night. We are in the finance business in the private sector. I am. I got an email, and if you are aware, the state of California has adopted a policy during this tax season. Their income, if you have an income tax refund, be it corporate or individual, from the state of California, they're mailing you back your paperwork telling you thank you very much and sending you an IOU. That is not a joke. That is what the state of California is in the position that they are doing now. People that have overpaid their payroll tax in 2008 have filed for a refund early, or file for a refund here in January, and have it coming to them. They're getting a check. Or excuse me, they're not getting a check. They're getting essentially an IOU and voucher, which made me scratch my head. And I wonder if one goes to buy groceries in California, can you take that IOU and ask them to knock the sales tax off? But it's just I just say that we're not into that situation in Georgia, and I'm not suggesting Commissioner Graham and the Department of Revenue are heading that way, but we are not alone in the revenue situation within our state. So we really appreciate you guys coming forward, and we're going to ask you to keep helping us get to the place that we need to be to continue to serve Georgia and Georgians and make this budget work.
A little more honest than some other jurisdictions.
Okay, I'm sure there's something in there. I do not have the batting order. Who do we have up first?
Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court on our document, ladies and gentlemen. We're in the 2010. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We're in the 2009 budget year, but we're on document 210 down in the bottom of the screen. Supreme Court is on page 13. Are we ready?
I see what you're saying.
Does all the members of the committee have that document? I'll take that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other distinguished members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here On behalf of the Supreme Court of Georgia, I'm Harris Hines. I'm one of the justices on that court and have been a member of it since July the 26th of 1995. With me is our distinguished clerk of court, Ms. T. Barnes, a very skilled lawyer who wears many hats. She gets paid for being clerk, but she is also an administrator and also a fiscal officer by the fact. If it may please you, Mr. Chairman and other members, I would like to just make a brief statement and talk a little bit about the court and what we have done per your request. Give you a little bit of maybe the history of the court. Ms. Barnes has had the handout which has gone amongst you, and then she will be here also, and we'll try to answer your questions as you present them. But again, it's a pleasure to be here. Supreme Court of Georgia is the highest judicial tribunal in this state, and it consists of a court of 7 justices who participate in every matter before the court. The court is the final authority on the state constitution, has original and discretionary appellate jurisdiction on cases, reviews all issues arising under Georgia law by considering petitions for certiorari to review decisions of our Court of Appeals, answer certified questions from the federal courts and Court of Appeals on issues arising under Georgia law, handles habeas appeals, death penalty cases, and extraordinary motions. That is in addition to being the governing body for the over 39,000, I think, approximate lawyers in our state for disciplinary matters. If I may digress, I guess one of the things that I did not anticipate when I came to the Supreme Court of Georgia was the time involved in the study given to disciplinary matters. I had no idea it was going to be that much. So in addition to the opinions and I will talk about that in just a few moments, probably every justice up there goes out per curiam, which means by the whole court, is also having 12, 14 disciplinary matters cases before each year. Now our court has the inherent, when I say our court, the people's court, your court, the Supreme Court of Georgia, has the inherent authority to regulate, as I said, the conduct of judges and attorneys, and also administer the bar admission examination. The bar exam is taken in February and in July of each year. To give you a little bit, to show you how it's increased, right now slightly over 50% of the people who take the bar examination in Georgia come with a degree from an out-of-state law school. That does not mean you may be a Georgian, you may have gone to Michigan or Virginia, but your law degree is from an out-of-state law school. It also has the constitutional responsibility to adopt and publish uniform rules for all of our classes of trial courts. It is also responsible for the functions of the reporter of decisions. Now, let me say this, the Court of Appeals shares in salaries on that. The productivity of the Supreme Court has grown each year, while the number of court personnel has remained the same for more than a decade. Personnel of the Supreme Court of Georgia has remained the same for more than a decade, and I do want to emphasize that. Our court, by a study of the University of Chicago Law School, and a report, it is ranked the #1 most productive court of last resort of the 50 states, and averages 58.33 opinions per justice a year, over twice the national average. Supreme Court of Georgia collectively will probably, and the Supreme Court of the United States collectively, will probably issue around 100 opinions, albeit certainly they were right on most of those cases themselves. But that is per justice, 58.33 opinions per year. In addition, as I said, to the disciplinary cases and the per curiam's opinion which come out from our court. The judicial branch, as a percentage of the state budget, is less than 1%, that being 0.80%. And of that 0.80%, the Supreme Court budget comprises 5% of the judicial budget. Only class of courts who have a smaller budget would be that of juvenile courts. Our court has, this court has, your court has, the People's Court has taken every precaution to operate within the required reduction by implementing some of the following methods to conserve funds, well, implementing all of those in addition to others. These are as follows. There has been a reduction in personnel. By the end of fiscal year 2009, there will be a 9% workforce reduction, and these employees will not be replaced. Our court is managing by attrition because we believe if we lose that position and it goes away, it can be less pressure to bring it back on than maybe if it was a furlough. Personnel reductions simply have put us back to the number of employees the Supreme Court of Georgia had several decades ago. We have instituted a hiring freeze. All raises have been frozen. There are no automatic step raises awarded. No other raises are implemented or proposed. In the area of computers and information technology, spending has been limited to keep simply the docket running. Our online research contracts, and that is the heart of an appellate court, is to research the law and render opinions for the people of our state. Our online research contracts have been renegotiated and they have been substantially reduced. There has been an elimination of printing of rules and biographical books. Supplies have been reduced to the very essentials. There has been an elimination of all repairs and maintenance. And all of you, like me, who may have been in the private sector, know that when you do that for a long period of times, things come up and bite you later. But that has been done. There has been an elimination of all non-essential library subscriptions. And a travel ban has been imposed on all but the essential travel for the justices of the Supreme Court. Our summer internship program has itself been suspended. When I talk about having done more with less for a number of years and going back and telling you how we have no more people now than we had on this court and the personnel of the court, the auxiliary personnel, than we had decades ago, let me give you just a little history, with your permission. The Constitution of 1835 was amended to authorize a Supreme Court in Georgia, but one was not created at that time, but rather was not created until 10 years later, in 1845, when enabling legislation and funding occurred. At that time, the legislature, in its wisdom, established a Supreme Court with 3 circuit riding justices. The Constitution was amended again in 1896 to add 3 more justices and to provide that the justices of the Supreme Court be elected by the people of our state. In 1945, a new Constitution added a 7th justice to the Supreme Court of Georgia. Our Constitution presently allows the legislature, in its enlightened wisdom, if it so choose, could increase that up to 9 members. When I talk about 1945, let me put it in perspective like this. You can see me, and my hair is certainly not brown or blonde, and if I didn't have these glasses on, I would not even see past the front row, or Representative Ralston, and my hearing is probably not that which it was. I'm 65. In 1945, when the 7th justice was added, I was 2 years old, if that will maybe do it a little bit. The population of our state has grown. The burdens on our court have grown. The burdens, I'm sure, on all courts have grown. Let me just say this a little bit about the population, which you, ladies and gentlemen, know more than I, but certainly affects all of us. In the decade of the 1990s, the state of Georgia grew by approximately 1.7 million people. And approximately today, we have about 9.8 million people. You know this. I'm telling you nothing new. But what has it done? In the census, the last census, the the census of the 1990s, 2000 census, Georgia gained 2 members of Congress. I might add, Pennsylvania and Illinois both lost 2 members of Congress because of our growth. At the next census, we will assuredly gain 1 more member of Congress and possibly 2. My home county of Cobb, which is the 4th largest county in our state by population, has more population than the states of Alaska, North Dakota, Vermont, or Wyoming, simply Cobb County, Georgia. And this increase has occurred. One of the areas that we're seeing more and more now is an increase in habeas corpus, which is time demanding and is very necessary. And that is because we have seen, while we've seen tremendous growth in the population, our prison population has exceeded that many times over. The figures I have, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, is in 1983 there were 15,209 hard beds in the penal system in the state of Georgia, which excludes counties and city municipal jails. 1993, that had increased to 27,762. In 2003 to 46,981. The last figures I have are 2007 of 55,205. To give you another statistic, Georgia leads the nation with 1 in every 15 adult Georgians under some form of correctional oversight. Now what I'm saying is we have a lot of pressure from that, although also by statute the federal habeas corpus procedure has been much streamlined, and this much more pressure becomes on the state habeas corpus proceedings, and that is one of the reasons we have increased. I would like to again just simply close by saying to you simply this. The Supreme Court of Georgia is a very small court in personnel, very small. We are operating with the same, as I said, number of people that we had several decades ago. And I simply show you this growth in our state, and I ought to show you what we are continuing to do. And I also tell you simply this, that of our classes of courts, and I'm proud of each and every one of them, I'm proud to call myself a Georgia judge and a Georgia lawyer, we have not increased our personnel, as I said, in several decades, and by expenditures, we are only court behind us in funding is the juvenile courts. Lastly, let me simply say to you, ladies and gentlemen, this. All of our funding is dependent upon the legislature. That is the source from which we get all of our funding. We have cut to the bone, and if we cut any more of the bone, mandated things will not take place, or possibly not take place, and that's not good. Right now, our court and the Court of Appeals has a mandated rule called the 2-term rule. You can say from about 4 months to maybe to 8 months. When a case comes, it has to be adjudicated within that period of time, or the lower court stands automatically affirmed. Certainly you could, I guess, extend the term of court that you don't want to do. But the other thing that I would say is not only that, when you have death penalty cases, and we've had a goodly number in Georgia, you're under very tight time constraints as to what must be done and when it must be done. I think we have provided good service to the people of Georgia with limited support attorneys and limited other personnel. And we hope that you will, and we know that you're aware of that, we hope that you will take that into careful consideration in all of your decisions. Again, a small court in number, and a court that is 5% of the judicial budget of the state being 0.80 of 1%. I do thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the legislature. I do thank all of the other staff members who work so hard for the citizens of Georgia. Thank you. Would you like to say anything, Ms. Barnes?
Thank you, Your Honor. We have questions. Ms. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justice Hines, thank you for being here. You mentioned just now about mandates that cost a lot of money for you to implement. Are these mandates that have been created in the infinite wisdom of the legislature?
Well, in all candor, several of the mandates are in the infinite and the enlightened wisdom of the legislature. We don't argue about them. It's just simply what's the constitutional law of Georgia. Right. That in appellate cases must be decided within 2 terms of court, or the lower court decision stands automatically affirmed. Now, I think that probably has, although I don't know of any other courts but the Court of Appeals of our state and our court that has that, Supreme Court of Georgia, I think you can argue it's a very good thing. What does that do? What does that do? It makes the business move much quicker. Some of our states of last resort would have a court that you may have a case that may, not hate to use the word languish, but may be there for several years. That simply is not going to happen in the appellate courts of this state. But to do that is very intensive to get it moving quickly. The research has to be done quickly. The opinion has to be written quickly. Argument has to be scheduled quickly. So those are things that we have. We also have mandated education requirements, too.
Okay. Justice Hines, would you be so kind as to have someone from the court provide us with a list of the statutory mandates we have imposed upon you? I know the constitutional mandates are going to be a different list, and we don't need to go there, but statutory mandates, I'd be interested in seeing any that have a financial implication on your...
I will do that, and I will ask our clerk. And again, when I say this, when I turn to our clerk, who is a clerk of court, traditional clerk of court, but now she's also going to be she is a fiscal officer, and she is an administrator. Ms. T. Barnes, as my dad would say, son, she's got a lot on her plate, and she does. I'm glad she is able to digest that which we put on it.
We are too. Thank you, Justice.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. And perhaps, we may have some questions that may be general, but to the specifics of the difference between your submission and the governor's recommendation, I think only differs in the workman's comp number. Is that correct? I mean, if the members of the committee noted, it's on different lines, but it's basically just OPB aligning it for ease of use. Is that not correct? Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what order we had in. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justice.
Thank you, Mr.
This question Mike had asked Ms. Barnes, I've got a question in my mind in this whole process of the 6, 8, 10% cuts across the board. I have a real problem with these across-the-board cuts. I think that things should be done prioritized. Can you tell me what has been the rate of increase of y'all's respective budget over the years? I think the purpose of the question is a lot of the agencies that are suffering the full 10% cut or being asked to give up 10%, a lot of those agencies haven't attritioned up over the last few years as high as other agencies. Could you tell? Have you got it right off the top of your head?
In our budget overall, I can get you those numbers.
Let me stand over
I don't want to be a designated committee member.
Well, we just need to get
Is that the right terminology? Okay. The growth in our budget, and Sherry Greer's here who can confirm this, it really hasn't been in personnel. You know, the cost of living increases, those type of growth. But other than that, it's just been, you know, personnel and slight raises here and there in terms of, I think we asked years ago for money, $50,000 for doing something to the courtroom. But that's really the growth in the budget.
Does this reflect a, quote, 10% or?
No, it doesn't, and I can confirm that for you, but no.
Just matter of curiosity
Right. No, I
about
will
how
get that
these
figure
departments
for
are
you.
being treated.
Right. I understand your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justice Hines, could you explain a little more about your elimination of, and I see all repairs and maintenance. Can you tell us what's going lacking over at the courts when you've done this?
I will just give you an example of pretty much anything that you do. Now, this has been for a number of years. If you were to come to the 5th floor where I'm on, usually you'd go to a water fountain and it would have a black garbage sack over it to keep people from drinking out the water. Their own offices buy bottles of water so you can have water which is drinkable. I just point that out. Maintenance, another one I just got on the other day, the elevators, which affect everybody in that work somewhat intermittently, and I think that's actually an accurate and a fair statement, is something of that's done. The maintenance on machinery is being eliminated. That we do that, and certainly, when you use computers and all that, you have a staff. But when you start eliminating that, after a while, bugs just crop up, and we begin to.
Are you eliminating like even your air conditioning system maintenances?
Well, I will tell you this: ours is turned on and off at certain times. It doesn't work well. You can be hot and cool, so we have that. But to say if we just shut down a system, no, I'm not going to tell you that we have done that. It's not working well, but those things. Can you add to that, Madam?
I want to chime in here, and perhaps we can invite them for the subcommittee. Invite Mr. Stansel, the Commissioner GBA over there. Last time I checked, one of the things that we had talked about over the last couple of years in your budget was the rent increase we got from GBA, which I think is just you paying another agency to do their buildings. You pay them rent for the buildings. If you've got water fountains and elevators that don't work, GBA needs to come and fix
we also would do this. I would say I'm not going to promise you that it's being done, but I guess theoretically it should be done if you did it by the numbers. If you were to hammer and put a picture on a wall, you probably should call the GBA and have somebody come over there and do it. I would submit to you that most people do what their mothers and fathers told them. Maybe it's a little bit easier to get forgiveness than permission on that. So
yes, sir, and I'm all for that. I'm just what I'm getting at here, I guess, is I'll be your advocate if you need one. If you got an elevator that's not working, just hold back your rent check.
Okay.
That's what I would do if it were me. So.
Mr. Chairman, I would do that, but I would hate for somebody to mandamus us someplace or something.
Well, I bet if it got all the way up to the Supreme Court, you'd win.
May not have too many recusals on that.
I'm sorry. I interrupted the chairman.
I apologize, Mr. Barnes. Representative Barnes, I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Justice Hines, I'm just trying to get an idea also, and maybe you don't have this, but maybe you can. I'm just curious as to how much money you're saving, or you think you're saving, by cutting out all, and I use quote, all repairs and maintenance.
Okay.
Do you have that figure?
I think our clerk can address that, I hope.
I can get the exact figure for you, but it's thousands of dollars. What we have actually spent $314 so far this year, fiscal year. So we didn't get anything painted. We have stopped any maintenance contract on our copy machines, our microfilm machines. Any of that stuff we have just completely eliminated. We actually can't even broadcast the oral arguments in our courtroom. We usually are able to do a remote site argument, and we haven't been able to do that because the machinery is broken and we have not had the money to fix it. So those are some examples.
What that would do, and let me say it's difficult to do, and I'll be honest with you, to argue, but if you went to, let's say, a college town, let's say you were at Statesboro, Georgia, you had two attorneys from Statesboro, that'd be a pretty good travel distance to Atlanta to argue. We had the equipment where you can argue, go to the college, and they can videotape it, and it directly comes to us right then. So when you do that, it not only imposes us, but it hits the other people. Certainly that hits the litigants and fees and things of that nature.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Justice.
Yes,
one quick question about the bar exam.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the administrator of the bar, is it sort of a wash, or how much does it charge to take that bar?
I think, if I can give you that, that is one thing I did try to pull in trying to speak to this, Madam Representative. And Madam Clerk, and if I give it to you wrong, please correct me. I think for the bar examination, it's grown to about 1,900 applications a year, or applicants a year. And right now, by statute, now it can be increased. I think the fee is $90 plus about a $45 laptop fee. Most of the people who take the bar now, when I took it, you took it, I think, in a little blue book-like thing, and maybe some of the others did that too. But now they take it mostly by laptops, and that's the fee. So I think I'm correct in saying this, that the statutory cap now is $90 plus a charge of $45 for a laptop fee. These fees are sent to the state treasury and are not retained by the bar office. I believe that's correct. Well, I'm glad to know I got it right.
Do you know when we went up on the fee to take the bar?
It has been, was it last year? I thought it was last year too, yes ma'am. I think it went up last year.
To be clear on that, the fee was prior to last year was
$75.
I'm sorry, it went up.
The cap. The statute allowed us to go up to $90.
Okay.
And it went from 75 to 90.
So that's what the legislation allowed. It allowed it up to 90, and it has now gone up to the max allowed. We have set that at the max. Yes.
Are we in line with what other states charge? I know with the SAT, it's been a couple of years since I took it, but I think it's a little...
I'm glad that I think I've forgotten mine. But,
I did too.
But my recollection is that, again, I am talking off the cuff and could be wrong. I believe we're lower than a goodly number of states. I think I'm comfortable in saying we're lower than a goodly number of states. Yes.
To follow your thought, I believe Ms. Smith just related to me, and I believe the conversations, you believe about $160 would make that a revenue-neutral proposition for the state. So what you would take in and send to the state treasury, and then any monies we sent back would be a wash, which is certainly something, I think, especially in this budget time, but quite frankly should have always been considered. That's something that it should pay for itself.
And I know with the cosmetology board, what we charge to take a for a beauty license is not comparable
to.
When you think about the income of
we just can't charge more than the 90.
Because that's the statutory maximum now.
Well,
sounds like a piece of legislation you might want to introduce.
Well, I think so. It should be revenue neutral, I think.
Okay. Did you have further questions, Seth?
That's it. Just want
Chairman Chambers. Who's next?
Justice Hines, is there any reason why we statutorily have to set the bar exam fee? Or to cap it?
Well, I guess you could if you wanted to give that authority to someone else. It's just been the legislature, being the control of the purse, does that, and the funds, as I said, do go to the general funds as opposed to going directly to a judicial branch or something of that nature.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, if we repeal that statute, would the Supreme Court be able to do it by, say, a rule or regulation?
I hate to speak for what we could or couldn't do off the cuff, and I would certainly hate to speak for my other 6 colleagues most, but as I don't know of any, as I presently stand here, I don't know of an impediment. Okay.
Wonderful answer. I see a repeal bill coming, Mr. Chairman.
I tried a few cases in my year, so.
Well, if there are no further questions, is there anything that either one of you would like to highlight for the subcommittee? I mean, one of the things that I think goes to point out, and certainly you have taken operational cuts from the budget, but just to make everybody clear, we are also getting of your almost $1 million reduction. A good number of that is coming from $355,000 is coming from the healthcare reserve that we're reducing across the board, and some other things that you have offered up. Certainly that puts you in a tight. The question I have is, and I don't see it here, you mentioned reducing the summer intern program, or this would eliminate the summer intern program. That's because you compensate the folks that come to you in the summer.
Mr. Chairman, we did for a 10-week internship, and we were paying $5,000 for a summer intern for 10 weeks. Now, when you compare that with those whom you compete against, we were truly, as I'm sure the Court of Appeals may have been doing, I can't speak for them, but we would do that. We were competing with some very top-flight candidates. That was very low. They wouldn't do it. They sometimes would want to go to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, I believe, as summer interns, so we were able to get that with that lower fee, but that was quite low. That has been suspended. I am hopeful. I'll show you how it is. I am hopeful this year then I can have a summer intern, and I've talked to a person who is, I believe, willing to do it gratis.
Well,
But that's what we've gone into. But as far as us having monies
right
now for it, no, sir, that has been cut out.
And that's what I was going to suggest. And again, the times are tough across the country. I would hope we would still try to have the folks come in and do that, because in this job environment, it may be important for them to differentiate themselves by being able to work with you and your colleagues. That has to be nice to put on your CV as you're going out into the world. Any further questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, you actually have a detailed characterization of the operation expense, the $500,000. Do you know what each and every one of those are in your office, or would we need to request that?
I think you probably have to.
Okay.
Right. Certainly, Representative Bernard, we'll get that for you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you.
Next up, we have it's the Superior Courts. What page are page 11?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Goss from Albany. I'm the president of the Council of Superior Court Judges. Charles Miller, our financial officer, is handing out a brief one-page summary. I believe we used something similar to this last week in the joint House and Senate Appropriations Committee. Just briefly, the Superior Courts are the general jurisdiction trial courts for the state of Georgia. We are statewide in 49 circuits. We have 202 elected Superior Court judges statewide, as well as approximately 70 retired senior judges, about 55 of which historically have been medically or age-wise able to work some to help us fill in shortfalls. I would point out to you that, as Justice Hines noted, obviously we've had meteoric growth in the state in the last 20 years. And while the legislature has been good enough to allow us to add some Superior Court judges over time, it's not kept pace with the additional population growth. And unfortunately, all the people moving into the state, sometimes some of them run afoul of the criminal laws and have divorce litigation and other civil litigation that ends up in court. We have been able to utilize the services paying per diem or by the day senior judges to sort of help us fill the gap and keep our finger in the dike. Our budget for FY09 across all of our budgets was $63,622,100. The governor's recommended budget that has been submitted to you was $57,621. I'm sorry, as you'll see on the handout. But I would mention to you that the governor's submission, while it does include the COLA reduction for the council office, Ms. Sandy Lee, our executive director, who's here with us, and her staff here in Atlanta, as well as the DCAs, the 10 district administrators statewide, their COLA cuts are already in the governor's submission. However, when we submitted back in August, we did not know yet if we would, what the COLA situation was going to be for the judges. We had not yet gotten a rescission letter, which subsequently we got. So we are able to turn back $669,099 in additional cuts beyond what's in the governor's budget proposal. That includes the judges' COLA reduction, the judges' secretaries' COLA reduction, and the law clerks' COLA reduction. So the judges, the law clerks, and the judges' secretaries are in the $669,099, which is in addition to the governor's recommendation. The council staff and the DCA COLA cuts are already in the governor's submission. I would also like to introduce with me today Ms. Sandy Lee, our executive director, Charles Miller, our financial officer, and Chief Judge Lawton Stevens from Athens, who's here working this week. As I mentioned, we have submitted to you 10+% in proposed cuts. Frankly, we feel we've cut a little too much. We didn't, when I talked to Chairman Martin back in late July, early August, and Representative Ralston, and the signal was coming up, this was not going to be good. We have so few things in our budget that we can cut, because the lion's share of our budget is the salaries of the elected judges and their one secretary each. We just went through and started trying to spend no more than we absolutely had to keep the doors open, because we didn't know what the level of cuts would be, and once the money was spent, we couldn't retrieve it. We did not use any senior judges after Labor Day until recently. In the Piedmont Circuit, we've had some really terrific medical emergencies where two of our judges have had very serious surgical situations and will be out probably at least until April. The third judge has been on the job now for 28 days in a 3-county circuit, and we've just had to send some senior judges up there because we don't have any legally trained magistrates in that jurisdiction to help us. In other words, the magistrate judges aren't qualified by law to sit in Superior Court in that circuit. In some of the more urban and suburban counties where you have lawyer magistrates, we can backfill that way. Didn't have that option in the Piedmont Circuit. We have asked, what we're asking for would still be a 10% cut. And you do not have to find this extra money. It's included in the $669,099 we're handing back. We're asking for $80,000 for travel expenses. That's mileage. We have cut out all out-of-state travel. We've cut out all out-of-state training. We've cut out all non-necessary travel at all within the state. This is basically like me driving from Albany up here to cover state business today, and it's the circuit riders going from County A to County B to County C to hold court. We're going to run out of money. We have chronically been underfunded in that line item. Just like last year, the federal reimbursement rate went up 3 times. That cost us $100,000 last year in money we didn't have budgeted. We've been able to pull it together, but we've cut everywhere so much we have nowhere else to go get the money. So we need $80,000 to finish out the year. I believe we looked, as of 31 December, 50% of the fiscal year was gone, and we had expended 69% of the mileage money. So we're projecting, unless we get that $80,000 back, we're going to run out of money in about April. We have asked for $15,557 for equipment. We have no equipment money whatsoever. None of the judges, none of the secretaries, none in the council office, none in the DCAs. We completely zeroed it out to try to get to the budget cuts level you asked. The $15,557 would at least give us something to fall back on if somebody's computer dies before the end of the year. But we have no money at all right now for that. The $212,100 we're asking for senior judge uses for active judge emergencies. We are projecting, based on the medical information that our 2 recuperating judges have provided, that it's going to take us about $60,000 in senior judge funds to cover that medical emergency in the Piedmont Circuit. The other $152,000 would be essentially 1.5 days if we have a judge get sick per judge statewide for the whole year. Just like, I had to counsel court today and tomorrow to be up here. I have no senior judge to cover court. We have judges get sick. Judges have to have surgery. Judges have to have a medical procedure. We have nowhere to turn. So that's why we're asking for that $212,000. The bottom line is that's approximately $320,000. If you would restore that back or release that money to us, we will still be turning back to you, in addition to the governor's proposed cuts, an additional $361,442, which I believe comes out to a 10.25% budget cut by the Superior Courts. Are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Your Honor, Judge, I appreciate this. I just bring back again. We sometimes get caught up. I appreciate the cuts you've taken, and we've had these conversations before. You're a large part of your budget is statutorily set salaries. A very large part is salaries. A large part of that is statutorily set salaries with which you can't do anything.
Constitutionally.
Well, yes. Okay. Well. You need to draw up an amendment to that Constitution. Now, I'm just.
It'll take 3 years.
You're correct. But so we appreciate the cuts you're going to take. I do want, just so that the folks that might be watching are in the room, to realize that you have worked with us and done that. But to point out, of the $6 million reduction, there too, about 2.5 of that is coming from the health care, the state health benefits plan, where we're drawing down the reserve so that we're not pillaging and plundering entirely the bench. But that said, you're doing a lot of reductions with the little places you have,
yes,
and we appreciate that.
And I would point out to you, Mr. Chairman, we calculated our budget for FY09 for senior judge usage to fill in for active judges and to help us with the caseload was just slightly more than $2 million. That is 3,949 judge days would be the functional equivalent of 15 judges. Now, that's a lot more cost effective for the state, because 15 judgeships, if you were having to fund benefits, secretaries, law clerks, would cost you about $6 million. So it's about a third the cost. It helps us keep up with the caseload, which we're getting behind on because of the budget cuts. But we have cutting out the use of senior judges, we have effectively reduced our judge workforce in the senior judge line item by 78% this fiscal year.
And I appreciate that. And again, I'm not arguing with you, Judge, when I say this. I don't want. I think all of our departments are working with us. Some more diligently than others. You happen to be one of the more diligent ones working with us. I just don't want people to come up here and your 10% versus somebody's 8%, or the Supreme Court might not have been 10%. They work just as hard with us. It's all I wanted to try to get. You had more health benefit money you could pull in there. Now, I have this question. You've been tremendous to work with. Your colleagues, the 201, should be very thoughtful, and I promise I don't know if you're up for re-election anytime soon or anything. But
just got past it.
But they should be proud of the voice and the face you are for them. So as I ask these questions, it's a general, not directing you. Do you have ways that you measure where senior judges go? I know you've got the situation at the Piedmont, but we all hear stories about some of your brethren work a little harder than others, and then the follow-up question to that is, when we get into these senior judges, I'll pull up, and I'm not going to mention anybody's name here, it's on the website, but we have one senior judge here that drew $76,000 in salary in 2008, and their travel expenses were $23,000. We got somebody else that was $68,000. I mean, I guess they're going where they're called upon. The question is, I mean, in these budget times, are we trying to making sure we pull them so they don't have to? And I know you are. Yes. In the discussions we've had lately, I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind, that we're not somebody just wants to spend a couple of weeks down in St. Simon, so they're the senior judge we pull. That has certainly been an internal philosophical discussion that was ongoing before this budget crisis hit, and we've been having some pretty direct conversations about that internally. So yes, sir, we're aware of it and are looking at it pretty hard. Okay. Chairman Ralston has a question.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, I just want to be clear here that the only utilization now of senior judges is for health emergencies. No, sir. The only utilization of a senior judge at state expense since Labor Day is in the Piedmont Circuit. That's it. We've had judges out sick. Right. They were just out sick. And we didn't have any way of sending a senior judge to fill in for them. And as I understand, what's had to happen is that judges from one circuit go to another circuit to cover, because is it not true that particularly in rural areas, oftentimes if one judge is recused because of the subject matter of a case or the identity of a defendant, maybe in a high-profile situation, all of the judges are recused. So this has been a pretty big deal.
It has been. Now, let me say, you take an example like Albany. I'm in a one-county circuit, and we're fortunate enough that all of our judges in the court system in Albany are lawyers. So we can, although they have their own cases, a magistrate can pinch hit occasionally for us. But then you get one county below Albany, where I grew up in Mitchell County. A lot of times in the rural circuits, they don't have legally trained magistrates, or they just don't have the flexibility because they're so spread out geographically that we can pinch hit. We've been filling in where we can. I'll give you an example. Cobb County. Judge Boterford was down here in Atlanta for many months. Did not use any senior judges. The Cobb Superior Court judges, there's several of them, and they were very good to each take a part of that and help him. Some of their magistrate judges who were legally trained and could sit, juvenile judge did the same thing. I went and held court in Cobb County a couple of days when I was in Atlanta up here on state business. So, we were able to piece that together. But you take a situation like Piedmont, that really points out the vulnerability we have when we get in a situation where we've got two judges out with extended medical leave and there's nobody there that can fill in. Then we're
Right.
really up against the wall.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, appreciate you coming and helping us. Curious about the backfilling where you're using the magistrates versus a senior judge, and I'm not even sure exactly how that process works. The expense, is there a difference between using a qualified magistrate to backfill versus having used the senior judge in the past?
Well, there are instances in the past where magistrate judges, when no senior judge was available, a part-time magistrate was used that was legally qualified to sit, could have been paid the per diem. However, in the instance I'm talking about, like in Cobb, they didn't bill the state. They just did it to help out their colleague in the building.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir. Sort of a professional courtesy, more or less. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Committee have further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have to be in the Senate
I was going to say,
committee.
you know when to adjourn. We have to be in the Senate committee?
Yes, sir.
I have more questions. Pass on our bet. Are you going to see Senator Hamrick, or is it Senator
I believe
Smith?
it's judiciary today.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor. Seriously, we appreciate you working with us. The next folks we have up, I think we have the Court of Appeals.
Yay.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. We're ready now. I apologize.
All right.
Let Ms. Mitchell tell us what page you're on.
Okay.
Page 4.
Okay, page 4. Well, good afternoon, and my name is Yvette Miller, and I'm the new Chief Judge for the Georgia Court of Appeals. This is my first presentation, and
Did you thank Judge Barnes for leaving you off at this budget year?
and that's right, Judge Barnes she's near and dear, and so is my court administrator, Mr. Bill Martin, and our fiscal officer, Jan Kelly, is here, so I've got the A-team with me.
Yes, ma'am.
But so, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the Public Safety Committee, I want to thank you all for your attention. I know you all have been diligently listening to all of us, and since I am new to presenting, I'm not new to making these court-type presentations, and I know you probably want us to shoot straight and go right to what you're here to deal with. And so I recognize the fact that this is a very tough economic time and a very tough budget year. But I would like to say that on behalf of all Georgians, I really think that you get the most bang for your buck out of the Georgia Court of Appeals. We are the intermediate appellate court. We have 12 judges on the Georgia Court of Appeals. And with a population base of 9.8 million, we should have no less than a minimum of 15 judges with the population in this state. But we do it all with just 12 judges. And I'm proud to say that we've got a really good group, and we really work hard for you. So I want to go right into our cuts. We have cut $1,650,605. And that does not, well, let me go further. At 5.11, that's the first statewide change, which includes the salary increases that would have been effective January 1. That's the 159, 151. The second statewide change is the health insurance benefit of the 655,772. And those two statewide changes, in addition to the program changes that I'm about to tell you about, totals up to the $1,650,000. Are you with me, Mr. Chairman, so far? All right, sir. All right, at 5.1.3, we are cutting our e-filing initiative, which is 45.329, which we feel that we really desperately need, but we recognize the fact that this is a year that because of the problems with the budget and the no money that we should not persist on. But let me just say that we need it. This is the 21st century, and our citizens deserve it, and our lawyers need it. With respect to 5.1.4, the docketing system, we are the funds that we received in House Bill 990, the 147.9, this has been a high priority. I mean, this docketing system that we're working with is an old green cobalt system, which could die any minute. And I don't want to say that too loud because I don't know what we would do. But we need it to do what we do every day, but we also need it to upgrade it so that someday we can move into the e-filing system, because we've got to, as we go further into the 21st century, we've got to be able to offer e-filing for the efficiency and the speed, because unlike our sisters and brothers in Florida, we don't have a regional court of appeals. We have the one court of appeals, just like we have one Georgia and we have one voice, and we do it all here out of Atlanta, as opposed to having a court of appeals in Tallahassee and one in Orlando and one in Miami, and each one would have the 12 judges in each location, as opposed to the one court in Atlanta. That's why I say you get a lot of bang for your buck. Now, at 5.1.5, we also have renegotiated and done everything that we could do, and we weren't able to get it where we wanted to get it, so we have taken out and cut the Westlaw contract. And Westlaw is the premier online research tool. And as the busiest appellate court in the state of Georgia, and as one of the busiest appellate courts in the United States, we need that. We really do, but we're doing without it. We're using LexisNexis, which is the online research tool that we had back when I was in law school. Well, not for the first time, but the second time. I don't like to tell that, but you know what I mean. But seriously, Westlaw has all of the resources, and they are the go-getters, and they have all the proprietary information that we need that we're having to do without. With respect to 5.1.6, this is the item number is 19497. This is all of our equipment. We're not buying any equipment for sure, and we really can't replace any. We're just trying to fix it if it breaks, except we really don't much have any money to fix it. So we're just kind of operating on prayer. And that was good enough for my grandmother. I don't know if that's going to really work at the Court of Appeals, but we are reinstituting that as one of our resources. So I hope that works. Okay. But seriously, we've stopped the purchase of all of our computers. We have currently 35 old computers. 5 are 15 or 6 to 8 years old. We have 5 servers that are over 7 years old. And we have no travel for our staff and only essential travel for the judges. And we have just cut everything out to the bone. With respect to 5.1.7, now this is the heart of what we've done. And this has really, this took a lot of courage, I think, because we cut people. We furloughed 9 support positions as of October 1, 2008. And they were 4 central staff attorneys, 2 floating administrative assistants, 2 clerk's office personnel, which was a deputy clerk and a mail clerk, 1 fiscal office employee, which was a procurement and facilities coordinator. And we had 1 other vacant position that we did not fill. Now, this amounted to a 12% reduction in our workforce. Now, you can imagine that these people were vital to the court's operation. So we are still functioning, but we're much more limited now in what we can do. So you may say, Judge, well, how are you working? Well, these layoffs have affected our efficiencies in all levels. Now, with respect to the judges' staff attorneys, because of the volume of the cases, coupled with the reduction of the central staff attorneys, we are now less able to review direct appeals for jurisdiction as quickly and as promptly as we were able to do previously. The screening of these cases is also less vigorous. The judges' staff attorneys are now having to scan these cases also. The floating attorneys are also not available to handle routine overflow cases. So the floating attorneys are only available to judges should an attorney vacancy exist for an extended length of time. So really what I'm saying is the central staff attorneys have to do the jurisdictional review because we have to deal with that. The attorneys that work directly for the judges will only get someone to fill in for them if they're out on maternity leave or family medical leave, and that will only be if there's not some other emergency of the same sort in somebody else's chambers, because we don't have enough people to do the work. With respect to central staff, it's been detrimental there. Our central staff office was previously staffed by 10 lawyers, but now it's staffed by 5 lawyers. So central staff screens, or more appropriately, they do a jurisdictional review on all cases filed with the Court of Appeals, both the direct appeals and the interlocutory and the discretionary applications. Now, in 2008, central staff processed 830 applications and 2,443 direct appeals. For direct appeals, central staff has to check first for jurisdiction. If they determine that the Court of Appeals does not have jurisdiction, then they will recommend via a memo to the court that the application be dismissed or transferred to the Supreme Court. The memorandum has to then be reviewed by at least 3 judges on the court who will either accept or reject the central staff recommendation. Now, with respect to application, central staff has to first check again for jurisdiction and then make a recommendation to the court as to whether the application should be granted or denied. Now, let me be clear. Behind the jurisdiction are obviously substantive legal issues. So they are looking at the legal issue and doing the research and giving us a recommendation as to how we should rule, whether or not we should accept that or we should reject that. The denial of an application is still a review on the merits. A granted application gives the parties the right to file a subsequent direct appeal. So this is the meat of what we do. But we're still not talking about those cases that we're going to hear on oral argument or that are coming into the judge's office that we're going to write opinions on. This is the other part of our work. Now, what's happening with respect to, well, let me go further. So I want to make the point that the applications are more time consuming for central staff. Since the caseload has remained the same or has risen slightly, the number of central staff attorneys available to review the cases has dropped by 50%. And that means that each case will get less time and less scrutiny. And also the central staff attorneys may be assigned to a judge's office in the event of illness or maternity leave or other extended absence. A judge's staff attorney is further depleting the number of lawyers that are available for jurisdictional screening. I mentioned this briefly with the Chief Justice, and she was concerned because obviously, we are making those screenings, and in some cases, these cases are being transferred to the Supreme Court, and that is delaying that time if it's initially filed with the Court of Appeals. Now, what about the clerk's office? The reduction in personnel results in some employees in our clerk's office obviously handling 2 jobs. And the clerk's office has lost 2 of its most senior clerks. The clerk no longer has a floating clerk to handle positions with which when employees are absent or vacant. So the position that was formerly the person that formerly handled the overflow work no longer works for us. The records librarian has to absorb the duties of the mail clerk. And the governor's initiative with respect to the flex time, we aren't able to implement that because our reduction in personnel is so great that we don't have enough people such that we can have a flex program. The fiscal office handles all of our financial, personnel, and payroll activities. And the reduction in personnel there has prevented those employees from having cross-training and has just, affected them greatly also. Also, the floating administrative assistants. The reduction in personnel detrimentally affects all the judges' offices as well. There is limited secretarial or administrative assistant help in the judges' offices and in the clerk's office. So if there's somebody unavailable in the judge's office, if we ask for help from the clerk's office, then that further delays the work because the clerk is already shorthanded. So, and last but not least, one of our favorite programs are the legal internships. And as Justice Hines mentioned, we have suspended the payment of the legal internships, and we will only be able to offer those internships on a gratis basis. And those are wonderful educational opportunities for the law students in Georgia. And many of us do give preference to at least those Georgia residents. They don't necessarily have to be coming from Georgia law schools. So in closing, I would just like to say that the Court of Appeals has reduced its budget as the legislature has requested. And although we have made the cuts, I feel compelled to say that the personnel reductions have really strained our ability to decide appeals. We would request that there be no additional cuts because any additional cuts would leave us with no alternative but to furlough our remaining employees. As you consider my request, please remember that the Court of Appeals handles approximately 86% of all appeals from the trial courts of the state of Georgia. We focus 100% on our core function, which is deciding the cases that come before the court in a timely, efficient, and fair manner, and work hard to administer justice in disposing of every case. We have a constitutional mandate to dispose of all cases within the two-term rule, and we have never missed that mark, and we certainly don't plan to start now. We are simply a court where the rubber meets the road, and we perform well, but it is dangerous to ride on a bald tire. I want to thank you for your time and your consideration, and we truly appreciate the work that you do, ladies and gentlemen of the legislature, and Mr. Chairman, the work that you do. We appreciate you, and I just want to say thank you.
Well, Judge Miller, we appreciate that too. I'm going to ask the committee for questions. I have a couple, if I can, if you need, if anybody can help you answer these. We talked about last year, and I hesitate to talk about additional revenue because anytime I call it a fee, somebody else is going to call it a tax. But as we talked about the increase in the bar to pay for the bar exam in the Superior Court, we talked about it last year, and I think you guys were on board. We have not set our fee to file an appeal. We have not increased that in a number of years. And we talked about doing that.
Yes. I have a point.
Help me.
Yes, let me help you.
Yeah, help me to remember what we were talking about doing and how much money that might generate.
Let me help you because I actually forgot. I have one last point.
Sure.
The filing fees are found in Georgia Code Section 5-6-4. And due to the state's economic crisis, we feel obligated to bring this idea up, and we have a suggestion for a revenue stream. Our filing fees, well, back in 1991, the filing fee went from $30 to $80, and that was a 267% increase. And now we have a recommendation today that we go from $80 up to $300. And we feel that that would be appropriate. And we think we have found that, and I think that Bill Martin can tell you more about this, but we have found that in the 11th Circuit here, their appeals, to docket an appeal there, it would cost you $450. And we're certainly not going to price anybody out of the market for getting their case decided, because we would have a pauper's affidavit and we would hear their case if they were truly legitimately unable to pay.
Help me out there. You said they went from 30 to 80, and did you say 81 or 91?
In 91?
91.
Yes, sir.
Well, and you make a point. What if we had that fee in place over the last calendar year, what would we have generated in terms?
$400,000.
For additionally?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it isn't, and where I wanted to go with it, and again, if I call it a fee increase, somebody else is going to call it. I'm going to stipulate that now.
It's really not a tax. It's a fee increase.
You mentioned the fact that if one does not have the means to pay the $80,
right,
there's a way that they will be heard and
That's right.
have access to the court.
Yes,
and is it not true?
Because we believe in access.
That most of the people spend more to drive down and file the case,
right,
than the $80 fee.
Yes.
And if we were so inclined to support that and could get the House and the Senate and the governor to
we feel
support us on
strongly about
that we could go through perhaps and use those monies to complete the e-filing
system,
sir, and the document upgrade,
and they wouldn't have to drive.
Whereby the lawyers would not have to drive down to file them anyway.
Yes.
It's just something for the committee to consider. But I know
please consider that.
As a percentage increase, that's going to sound like a lot, but in terms of what it costs and an attorney that, or even an intern from an attorney's office to come down and file the appeal, they're spending more in personnel costs by a factor of 3 or 4 than the appeal costs. I have. Do you have anything along these lines? I have another question.
I was just going to say, you mentioned California, and the state of California has a filing fee of $655, and I think that. I think that's pretty interesting, especially since they're sending out IOUs.
Yes, ma'am. I have another question, but I yield to Chairman Bernard. I think.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the justice may have just answered my question. I was curious what other states were actually charging. Do you have, other than California, do you have other information?
Well, my clerk could answer.
Maybe give me some of the states around Florida, Alabama. Well, you got a published paper. That's you're prepared.
If you don't mind, just in the time while we're passing that out, let me ask you this.
Yes,
you mentioned the financial folks, and again, I won't say I don't want to face a situation, furlough or RIF, whatever, but it begs the question, are you required by statute to have your own finance department? Could we share that with the Supreme Court and Court of Appeals and get some synergies out of? I mean, you talked about payroll and those sorts of things. You have 116 employees thereabouts, or you
Right.
had that in 08. You may not have that many now,
Right.
or folks that work with you. Is that something that we could consider and look at an economics of scale?
You mean consolidation?
Consolidation of just the finance. I mean, you're in the business of hearing cases.
Yes, sir.
I don't want you as chief judge of that court to have to worry about how you're getting paid or if the elevator's
Right,
working, to go
right.
back to
Well,
Justice Hines' comment.
Right.
How can we think about how we might help you to team up with the Supreme Court
I would love to
and
team up with the
consolidate
Supreme
that
Court.
finance function, because you do a lot and you're big, but you're not so big that you have to have your own payroll clerk,
Yes.
and there are people that
Well,
do
my
that for a
people are
living.
terrific now.
I'm sure
Mine
they
are
and-
wonderful. But really, somebody said to me today, "Well, Chief, why don't you call GBA and do something about the elevator?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to step on Chief Justice Sears' toes. She might want to do that, but I will. I'm a can-do person. I will do it. But
Well,
there's a lot
let's
to be
talk
done. We
about-
can share.
Let's talk about that over the next
Okay.
few days or weeks with your folks.
I'm looking forward to
Chairman
working
Bernard,
with
do
you.
you want to follow up on the information that was just handed out?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is quite fascinating. Florida does charge $300, and so does Alabama charge $100. So we may be well behind the curve on that. That's probably noteworthy.
Doing that, and while we can't, please come up there, but we can't dedicate the revenue, but certainly idea would be to take that and put it into technology that would make the filing process easier, more efficient, and make arguably, I guess inarguably in my mind, justice more accessible to Georgians. Yes, sir, did you have something further?
Mr. Chairman, to try to explain that first list I gave out, and that's just sort of an easy look at it. If you look at some of the states, it's really more difficult than that. For instance, New York charges $315. That's an initial filing fee. They then charge $45 for each and every motion that's filed. Michigan charges $375 for a filing fee. They charge $100 for each motion that is filed. They charge $25 for the record transmittal fee. They charge $200 for an application. They charge $100 for a motion to stay. So that is, the list I've given you is the minimum for these other states. A lot of these states have add-ons and tack-ons. If you file a motion for reconsideration, if you file a motion for an extension of time to file your brief. I just wanted to make that clear. That's probably the minimum fee you see there.
Okay. I think I had that legislation drafted last year, and it was late in the session, and we didn't drop it. But I think that is something that I will talk with, certainly leadership and see if that's something we would consider. Did you have anything further?
Yeah, I was just sort of curious, and obviously you're ahead of this, obviously having had legislation, but it looks like that the whole fee process for the judicial system may need to be reviewed across the board. There may be other opportunities there that would help.
Okay. I think so. We have any further questions? One additional question, and I think you mentioned it, and this goes to consolidation or coordination, and I don't know if Director Crawford is here. I don't know if Mac is here. He had mentioned, obviously several people use Westlaw.
Right.
It would seem that we could all get together and make one big deal.
It would be great.
Or one good deal. I mean, again, that...
Because you see what they do is they pit us against each other, and I see that.
At least they remember the economy is slowing up too, so we may be able to get.
They might be
deal
ready
there,
to come
so.
to the table.
Well, I mean, it's just a fair question. Does anyone have any further? I'd like to talk to you further,
I'd like
or
that
your
too.
folks about the financial consolidation, or perhaps with
We're ready
Ms.
when you
Mitchell,
are,
how we
Mr.
might
Chairman.
could help you there, and then we'll follow up with you also on the fee. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have one minor question on the equipment. You mentioned the 35 old computers that you're concerned.
Yes, sir.
That you're praying over, I think
Yes.
you said. Do you have some sort of maintenance contract that will protect you in the event that there are problems?
I'm going to get my fiscal officer to answer that question.
I don't believe they have maintenance contracts on the computers. They do on the servers and some of the bigger pieces, but just like a laptop or the regular PCs, they wouldn't.
So it's not bad, but it's bad, but it's not that bad.
No,
Okay.
the big ones like the servers, absolutely, they've got a support contract on them.
Thank you much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to suggest at the same time, if we're able to consolidate the finance departments of both of the courts, then perhaps we can get the Attorney General or someone to help negotiate one Westlaw contract for the entire upper courts, for both upper courts. Although I think, would it be possible to negotiate for the entire state and have the AG do that for us? Now, I'm just sending that's hypothetical.
I don't know. I mean, and this is a question. I mean, I know
We're in the same building.
Well, the DOT over there, and I'm not enamored with the way they function lately, but I will applaud them for this. Mm-hmm. They used to go out when they did their LARP, local assistance road program, and bid, and now they've cut all the money out of it. You're right, Chairman. But when they did that, they had a contract, and they would be with XYZ, asphalt company, and they would get that. And as a city, if you had additional monies, you could get the state contract. It would seem that we would go and negotiate a state contract for Westlaw, and then our courts out in the cities and counties, if they wish to have that, would be able to buy off that contract. It would just seem, I don't know why we wouldn't do that.
So commonsensical.
Okay, we can work on that further. So,
Thank you.
Any further questions? I know we have a number of other folks. We have scared one up from Chairman House. Yes,
My
ma'am.
further question about the maintenance of the building. I mean, something needs to be done.
I think we'll put in a call to G.
Could you call GBA for
If
us?
they're paying rent,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the elevator, only one elevator's working today.
let's don't forget about that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, we thank you for coming. I think we've got
Did a
next
good job.
Judicial Council up on page 5. Give everybody this 5 minutes, and then we need to step out take a quick break. We'll stand at ease for 5 minutes before we start Judicial Council. If we could begin to settle down, we'll get started. What page are you on?
I am
Page 5.
page 5. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here today to talk about the Judicial Council budget. And with us here today, we have our attached agencies, as well as the AI as an AOC staff. The attached agencies have come today to talk to you about how they've been working to reduce their budgets and where they can save money within their budgets. We've all been working real hard to try to identify those areas. So if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll let the attached agency folks come up and talk to you about their budgets, and then I'll go into the Judicial Council section,
Okay,
or the AOC portion of the bill.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay.
If we could, can we go in the order, or were you planning to go in the order?
I
they
was
were on
planning to go in the order
tracking
with the
sheet? That'd be
exception of
perfect.
JQC. I was going to put her before Judicial Council, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. So we're
At Appellate Resource Center. And I have Tom Dunn here today, who's the
Absolutely.
Executive Director of the Appellate Resource Center. That's the document they're looking at.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tom Dunn. I'm the director of the Georgia Resource Center. I think everyone on the committee knows the purpose of our office. We ensure that everyone sentenced to death here in Georgia has counsel in state habeas proceedings. We were established 20 years ago by the combined efforts of the state and federal courts and the Georgia Bar, essentially to ensure that the cases could move forward to final resolution. We took a 33% reduction in funds from the General Assembly last year. That includes the 6% decrease. And we have clearly cut back both on our major category, which is personnel expenses, but also in the area of litigation expenses. We are struggling to keep up with the caseload we have. If you go to Attorney General Baker's website, he'll tell you that death penalty cases in post-conviction state and federal habeas are moving faster than they've ever moved in modern history. I believe that it's not just Attorney General Baker's office that's responsible for that, but also the work of my office. We work on a shoestring budget. I would invite any of you to come visit our office. You would be, I would say, appalled to see the law office that we work out of. We have a phone system that we bought 20 years ago. It's never been updated. We use volunteer lawyers to try to ensure that the small funding we get from the state goes a long way. Routinely, my volunteer lawyers will have their legal assistants call for my legal assistant. Of course, the problem is I don't have a legal assistant, and they're baffled by that. We work on a shoestring budget. We work hard, and these cases move very quickly today. 2 years ago, the Senate asked the Division of Audit and Budget to do an audit of our office, and it was determined that my attorneys handle more cases for far less money than other cases within the South who do death penalty work. Prior to 2007, from 1976 until 2007, we averaged 4 capital evidentiary hearings a year. The most that we ever had in 1 year in that 31-year period was 6. In 2007, we did 12. In 2008, we did 12. In 2009, we will do 10. So we are working these cases faster than they've ever been worked, but we can't really suffer any more losses. If the committee has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Does the committee have any questions for Mr. Dunn at this time? Any questions?
Chairman, we're at 6 staff attorneys, 5 investigators. I have an office manager and a part-time administrative assistant who essentially helps keep up with the filing and the copying. It's the staff that I had back in 1995 when we lost all of our federal funding. At that time, I had a caseload of 30 cases. I have a caseload now of 84.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you.
The next, if we're going in order, the Office of Dispute Resolution.
With us, we have Sinji Moricumbo. He's the Executive Director of the Georgia Office of Dispute Resolution. There's the.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Shinji Morikuma. I'm the Director of the Office of Dispute Resolution, have been for just over a couple of years. Let me tell you about our office a bit. Our office is the main overseer of a statewide system that provides alternative dispute resolution services through the state courts. It was created in 1992 in cooperation with the State Bar of Georgia and the Georgia Supreme Court as a way to help unburden the court dockets throughout the state. Even back in 1992 and 93, there were concerns about court dockets being overloaded. At that time, in 1993, there were 3 counties in Georgia that offered any kind of ADR services in the courts. Today, those services are offered in 111 counties throughout Georgia, and we're working on the other 48 counties to get them started in ADR. The impact of our system since 1997, which is when we can start finding some reliable statistics, about 285,000 civil cases have been referred to the ADR system in Georgia, and of those, we estimate 137,000 civil cases. 137,000 civil cases have been settled without further action of the courts through this system. We estimate that in fiscal year 2008, about 38,000 civil cases will be referred statewide to ADR services, and 20,000 of those cases, 20,000 civil cases, will have been settled through the state ADR system in fiscal year 2008. The impact of that on the judicial system and on the taxpayers is this. 20,000 civil cases, I'm told, is the equivalent of the full-time work of 17 judges and their staffs each and every year, working only on civil cases. The cost, if those 17 judges and their staffs were to be funded, would cost the state approximately $6.5 million a year, every year, for those extrajudicial services. The services that our registered mediators and arbitrators provide to the state is that we help keep the judiciary as efficient as possible so that judges and juries hear those cases, civil cases, that truly require their intervention, and we help to settle those cases that really do not. Let me just talk to you briefly about the cuts we've been making we've submitted 6, 8, and 10% cuts. Those reductions constitute reductions in our professional services, per diem fees, and expenses, and those are mainly concerned with our training responsibilities. One of our mandates is that we need to help new courts start ADR programs that are interested and train their staff, train people in the community to be mediators and arbitrators. We also are charged with providing continuing education to those programs that already have ADR programs. The reductions in the per diems, professional fees are going to affect our training abilities, but those are where we felt the reductions could be made the best, and we hope that our own staff can take over some of those duties. I just want you to let you know that we do take in fees. I know that's going to get your attention. We have always charged registration fees to our ADR professionals in the state as long as the system has been in place. And as long as the system has been in place, there's been a two-tiered system of $25 and $125. And that hadn't changed until just recently, I'm embarrassed to say. We have raised the fees, so everyone pays a flat $125 to be qualified, at least initially, to serve as a professional mediator or arbitrator within the court system. We don't know. We just added that increase during the beginning of our renewal season for people who are registered already. That started in December. We can't know the effect of that increase. I know that on average we have generated about $60,000 a year in fees over the last several years. Most of those fees have been the $25 fee. Now that everybody's paying $125, I can't say for sure what the impact is going to be. What we're hoping is that we'll be able to increase our income from the fees and reduce our burden on the state significantly. But what we're finding as we're in the middle of our renewal season is that our registered mediators and arbitrators are choosing not to renew and that they're dropping out. And so the population from which we could charge those fees is shrinking because people feel that the fee is beyond their abilities. And oftentimes the mediators, particularly who work in the court system, often do that at a per case rate of $25 a case, no matter how many hours it takes. Many of them do it on a volunteer basis. They don't get paid for any expenses, and many of them have told us that the fees that we have had to increase in order to reduce our burden on the state taxpayers is beyond what they feel is justified. So we can't tell you the effect of our fee increase. We hope that it will generate more income, but we'll have to see. We won't know for probably another 6 months or so the full impact of those fee increases. Are there any questions? I'm happy to answer them.
I have one. Chairman Ralston.
Mr. Ralston.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, thank you for being here today. I was going to ask you about the fee increases.
Yes, sir.
Who was paying? How did you differentiate between $25 and $125?
Yes, sir. There was an income bracket. I believe the cutoff was ADR professionals who had made more than $2,500 in the prior 2 years providing ADR services, either through the courts or privately, were asked to pay $125. Those who attested through an affidavit that they did not make that much money paid the $25. Our suspicion, which has been growing lately, is that there are a lot of people who were paying $25 that should have been paying $125. I think that's part of the reason why the commission said everyone's paying the same amount.
Do you have a list of those that do this on a volunteer basis? I mean, I go to mediation and my client pays
yes, sir.
Substantial sums and oftentimes with good results.
Yes, sir.
And so, I'm a little concerned here that this thing's not funding itself. I mean,
we were estimating that about 30 to 35% of the registrants every year were paying the higher fee. So 65 to 70% were attesting that they were working at a stipend or volunteer level. I think a lot of the programs, especially the juvenile courts, the magistrate courts, do depend on volunteers and on people who earn $25 an afternoon and $25 a case. Mr. Olson, the cases that you're handling probably are more complex cases. They probably are attorney.
We don't have any of those where I am. These are just pretty simple cases that we're paying $200 and $300 an hour.
I'm assuming they're attorney mediators as well, and and they, well, let's face it, Mr. Olson, and we're both lawyers. Lawyers want to hire other lawyers for these services. There's a comfort level there, and there's a credential there that I understand about. So there are attorney mediators, and I would say the attorney mediators are the ones who are commanding some higher fees per case. But the vast majority of mediators, especially non-attorney mediators, are not able to make a full-time living at it. It's a relatively rare thing, and people just aren't willing to pay, particularly people who are unrepresented and can't afford their lawyers anyways. Oftentimes, those are the kinds of cases in which mediators are assigned. I think you're dealing with the cream of the crop, I think, Mr. Ralston.
Follow-up question, yes, Mr. Chairman. A couple of years ago, your office got some money from the Bar Foundation,
yes, sir,
as I recall.
Yes, sir.
And now our economic situation, obviously, as we've heard repeatedly, is much more dire than it was then. Is there any possibility that we could look back for some funding there now?
From the Bar Foundation. We went to the Bar Foundation one time. We asked them to replace the operating funds that we were cut that budget year. It was the first year that I was here in 2007. And they agreed to make up the operating funds, even though they normally do not pay give grants for operating funds for state agencies. They gave us that, but they made us promise, and we promised that it would be a one-time thing and that we would never come to them again. I'm sorry to show
so they didn't want to see you again.
That was the they don't want to see us again.
I understand.
So here's your money, go away, and don't ever come here again. Is the message we've?
They shouldn't have given it to you the first time.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, I have one follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
And I don't want to belabor this and pound on the director too much. Are you telling us, though, that the mediators who are charging $200 or $300 an hour, and that is split,
yes,
between the parties,
yes,
are paying $125 a year?
They were
to
paying
register?
$125 every 2 years.
$125 every 2 years.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Ralston, I know what you're saying. That seems to be inadequate. I've talked to my commission about it recently when we were debating the fee issue. Essentially, what's happened when we've made it a flat fee is we've charged 5 times more to the people who are volunteers and people who attest that they're making less, but we did not increase the fees on the people who are making the most money.
And it's true, is it not, that that parties in a civil case, for example,
yes,
can use someone who's not even registered with your office if they both agree on doing that as a mediator, can they not?
They can do that. They under the Wilson versus Wilson decision from the Supreme Court last year, it seems that in order for people to go privately and to use mediators who are not registered with the state in the appropriate category, they have to officially opt out of the system and notify their local program that they're doing that. That means that if they go private, they are not subject to any of the protections or
sure,
immunities under the Supreme Court rules. Essentially, they're on their own. But yes, people have always been able to choose their own mediator. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir.
Director, would you describe for me what you would define your core mission is in your office?
Our core mission, it changes from year to year depending on the work volume, but our core mission is to regulate the quality and the quantity of the dispute resolution services that are offered through the courts. That is what the system was charged with in 1993. We do that by every registrant, every renewing applicant for registration undergoes a rigorous check of credentials and recheck of credentials, education, training, continuing education, ethical issues. We do a criminal background check on every one of them. This is 2,200 or more. That helps us regulate some of the quality of the services. We assist the local court programs. There are about 40, some big, some small, and we provide them with training for their staffs. Screening cases for domestic violence, for example, is not something that most of us are born with the ability to do. It's not a training that's out there in the marketplace, and we organize and offer those trainings to the court programs so that the quality of the screening that they provide to those cases meets the standards of the Supreme Court. Those are the kinds of areas in which we regulate the quality by encouraging court programs that don't have ADR services. I was just in the Tifton Circuit 2 weeks ago meeting with the judges there who are interested in starting an ADR program. Their dockets are feeling the burdens of an increasing population, just as anyone else is. And so in that way, we help to promote the quantity of ADR services as well. And the use of ADR is growing between 5 and 10%, we believe, every year.
Yeah. I'm trying to find out, is your primary, as you described it, primary oversight a regulatory matter as opposed to training? Or how would you divide it up?
We're charged with doing both, quality and quantity. And quality is the regulatory.
Tell me to divide it up for me.
I'm sorry?
Try and divide it up for me. How much you doing is regulatory? How much are you doing involves actual training of either new or do they go through retraining once they get?
There's continuing education requirements
that's done by your office?
Some of which we provide, some of which is available in the marketplace by our approved trainers. The regulatory functions probably take up a good 3/4 of our time. The training takes up 25%. That percentage has changed over the years as the growth of ADR has taken off in the court system. We find that we're doing more of the regulatory work and less of the training work, unfortunately. We'd like it to be balanced, but right now we're about 3/4 regulatory with it. And I'll add this, that we have a full-time staff of 3 people to manage the ADR system for the whole state.
I thought one last point,
yes,
Chairman. What I'm hearing you say about the regulatory side, though, is a person does not have to be, quote, under the regulation of your office. They can, quote, opt out because they aren't happy with how much they're having to pay as a fee. Then what happens?
They can, but then they are not. The Supreme Court ADR rules provide for registered mediators who are registered in the appropriate category of the subject matter of the case. They are provided. They're subject to the ethics rules, but also ethics protections, confidentiality of the mediation process, immunity from their actions. Those are the sorts of protections that are offered, and it offers a standard ethical guideline, standard ethical rules to follow. And the court system under the ADR rules said, if you are going to handle a court-connected case, you must be a registered mediator in the appropriate category, unless, as of the case last year, you make a formal notification to the local program that you do not want to use a mediator who's subject to the ADR rules and the ADR protections.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Just to get my hands around this.
Yes, sir.
You have three staff. You have how many people registered with the program?
Active registrants about 2,200 to 2,400. It depends on how many people come in during the year.
Okay.
At any one time, about half of them have to renew. It's a 2-year cycle.
And the funds from that renewal go where?
The registration fees, those are the fees that we collect, about $60,000 a year on average.
And they go into the state treasury?
They are, I don't know what, they're in our government investment pool fund. They come back to us.
They're other agency funds.
And they can, so that by their statute, they were set to keep those funds? I'm just asking if can that happen?
They come as other agency funds, and they use that for their operations. It does not go into the general fund.
And how is that? I thought all funds collected by state agencies had to go into general funds set by the Constitution. And you may be educating me here. What am I missing? Okay, so they've set. Okay, got you. So the current fees that you're getting generate about 60. give or take. I mean,
$60,000 a year. As I said, we've increased those fees on a substantial portion of the population. We don't know if we're going to see a significant increase in the income from those fees because people are telling us it's too high. I don't feel like we're being registered anymore, and so we may actually see a drop off in the population of people who are registered with us. It's a difficult balancing act.
I understand, but Secretary of State, I mean, if they have a business of any kind, Secretary of State charging them $75 to go click a button on on the website to stay registered with the Secretary of State. Okay. Any further questions? Any further questions? All right. I think that does it for this afternoon. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Director. You wanted to then go. We're still going to
real quickly. Rich Reeves apologizes and sends his regards. He can't be here today. He's training newly elected state court judges, and he was actually the presenter this afternoon, so he couldn't be here today
for
ICJE Institute of Continuing Judicial Education. I gave you a handout that has Institute of Continuing Judicial Education across the top that looks like this. Rich has sent us that. Those are the things, the detail about his reductions for both 6 and 8%. I'll try to answer any questions that you have about ICJE, but I may need to get with him to answer anything that I can't answer today.
Yeah, and we can move on just in the interest of time. Perhaps have him back, or you in a different thing. I want to look at that budget. I want to look at the baseline of that budget.
Okay.
So I want to go above the line from there. I don't know if any of the other members have any specific questions. We can move on in the interest of time until he can come back.
We'll try to set up a meeting.
We'll do that.
Okay.
And then you wanted to go to
Cheryl Custer, who's the executive director of the Judicial Qualifications Commission.
Perfect. That's what that's something.
Thank you very much. I think I'm on the last page. If you'll look to the very, do you find me on the last? Page 6, almost the last page. Okay.
Yes.
My name is Cheryl Custer. I serve as the executive director of the Judicial Qualifications Commission of Georgia, and I know you've heard this before. Just a small little bit. We are the constitutionally created commission charged with accepting complaints filed against any judge in Georgia. Our job is to investigate those complaints and, if necessary, prosecute judges for ethical violations. We are a staff of 2. We answer to a commission of 7 volunteers. The commission members live all over the state of Georgia, and they serve as the commission. Basically, the duties of the commission are to receive any complaint filed by any person in Georgia against any judge. There are 1,800 give or take any day of the week, people serving as judges in Georgia. You've probably heard today a lot of discussion of people who have non-judicial training. Let me explain to you what they were talking about again. There are non-lawyers in Georgia serving as judges. If you all don't know that, it's time for you all to understand. We also give formal and informal opinions to judges on the interpretation of the Code of Judicial Conduct, which is the ethical code that judges are charged with upholding themselves to. And then we participate in the mandatory continuing judicial education, which Mr. Reeves provides through the Institute of Continuing Judicial Education to train all 1,800 judges in Georgia. And I'm here rather than being with the state court judges doing their training today, because it's usually where I am. Our budget is quite small, I think. We are going to have to cut our budget in the only place that we can cut, and that will be in the monies that we have allotted to spend to investigate and prosecute judges for ethical violations. I do not have an investigator to investigate cases. I hire an investigator on an as-needed basis. If we have to file formal charges against a judge, we hire lawyers to prosecute on behalf of the commission to handle our ethical violations. Right now, with the reduction, we ask if we could to only be reduced 6%. I know that's asking a lot, and I know we all need to do our part. That will bring my budget to $267,362. I would be delighted to answer any questions you have. I know a lot of the members, Mr. Chairman, are attorneys and may understand or not understand exactly what we're doing. The commission has been in existence since 1973 when we created it in our Constitution. It was ratified in our Constitution in 1983. I have been honored to serve in this position for 9.5 years. Our budget has been reduced over the years. It has not been increased every year. Actually, we have less to operate under 2 years ago than we had 5 years ago. Does anyone have any questions?
Committee have any questions? Can you tell me your budget, House Bill 990 from last year is $299,000. You have 2 staff members.
Yes, sir.
Can you give me a quick breakdown, or just provide it to us later on what your operating budget looked like in detail for FY08?
FY08.
I mean, you
We
don't
have
have it today. If you could just get it through us.
I can probably tell you a little bit right now. I think I have it kind of broken down. The staff consists of myself and my administrative assistant.
Right.
All right. We basically, looking at my FY08, we spent on personal services, which is what I sort of call the payments to be able to have my staff, my secretary, and I operate the commission, about $215,000. That is everything. That pays our retirement, our health care, our assessments.
Fully loaded salary, sure.
Yes, sir. Then the regular operating expenses of the budget of the commission, including our phone, our water, our sewage, everything else, we spent about $41,000 last year. The rest of the money that we spent, which was about $45,000, was spent on investigations and prosecution of judges for ethical violations, if you break it down in that amount. I do need to tell you that we had some very high-profile cases last year, and I presently still owe $87,000 to my attorneys for last year's cases. $87,000.
That presents that presents a problem unless somebody. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Are you required to use contract attorneys, or could you not use the services of one of the state agencies? Prosecuting?
In the past, the question has come up, could perhaps the Attorney General's office represent us? We have discussed this with the Attorney General's office, but it can present a conflict for them, and they have not been available for us to do that. We are not required. I think they are understaffed and undermanned, and we could ask them to do it. I am an attorney, but to try for me to prosecute the case on behalf of the commission to me would be a little bit difficult backwards. So that is not usually an option. It is an option to ask that they have not been available to provide it. I don't know of any other state agency that I can think of that could provide us with an attorney, unless you can, Representative.
I'll think.
Yeah, I'm off my head. I can't think of
so
one.
Many of them.
Yes, there are. Maybe the DOT would have a lawyer that could help me, but
maybe ethics.
Yes, sir. Maybe. Well, I think they've got their plate kind of full over there at the State Ethics Commission too. So. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Custer, for
Thank
being
you.
here. I know you can't divulge about your investigations. Can you tell us, over the last 2 or 3 years, approximately how many complaints each year that you receive about judges?
Yes, sir. Actually, those numbers I do publish in a annual report, and let me give you those numbers for the last couple of years. In FY06, we had actual people contact my office directly. About 759 people contacted us. 362 people saw fit to send their complaint forms back in, and of those complaint forms that came back in, we basically investigated or docketed about 50 of them. We have a lot of communications between inmates. I do get a lot of correspondence, because when you write me, I will write you back. So I do correspond a lot with individuals, and in our penal systems in the state. We had about 730 in FY 2007 complaint forms that came in, and about 685. So we roughly estimate that about 700 people contact us, and about 400 people send complaint forms back in.
Do you have a screening, any kind of screening process that you use, or
yes,
the
sir.
commission uses?
That is my major job, is to screen all complaints, every single complaint. I am the only person there. I read every single complaint that comes in. I pass, I do an initial screening, and then we present them to the full commission if they raise issues over which we have jurisdiction. Any complaint that raises an issue over which the commission would have jurisdiction is docketed for the commission to move forward. Our cases are confidential up until the point of when formal charges are filed against a judge, and then everything is done in public in front of the commission.
So out of the 700 and ever how many phone calls,
yes,
then about 300 or 400 actual documented complaints.
Yes, sir.
And then you winnowed the field on down to about 50 that went some distance further.
Yes, sir.
How many formal charges?
Last year we filed 4 sets of formal charges. Presently we have 2 pending.
Okay.
One against a former magistrate court judge in Glasscock County, and one against a sitting state court judge in Chattooga County presently. Those 2 charges are presently pending in front of the commission. Anyone have any other questions?
Your outstanding legal bills.
Yes.
From whence are you going to? From whom are you going to get those?
I
dollars?
am. My friends who have represented us are being understanding. That's all I can tell you. These lawyers were paid some funds. We haven't not paid them anything.
I understand
okay.
that. I just, but what, and maybe this isn't a conversation for a different day, but I just, yes, they're headed toward being valuable public servants.
Yes, well, they're headed toward doing a very substantial chunk of pro bono work on behalf of the Supreme Court and the Judicial Qualifications
Commission. I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but
no, we do not.
There's not a budget request in for it.
No, sir, there is not.
Okay,
it was not the right time for me to ask you for that.
I understand, and they're understanding of that.
Yes, sir, they are.
Just wanted to,
and I just
wanted
can't.
to be a team with
I
you
didn't want
as that goes.
This was not the right time to ask you all for that. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, as we move into Judicial Council, I have Judge Tim Pape here, who's the chairman of the Georgia Courts Automation Commission, and George Nolan, who is the executive director of the Georgia Courts Automation Commission. If I could let them go ahead so that Judge Pape can be excused before I go into the rest of the Judicial Council budget, if that's agreeable with you.
That works.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and have some discussions. Let me explain, at least initially, what the commission, Georgia Courts Automation Commission, is about. In the early 1990s, the legislature determined with the judiciary that the need for technology in the states and the judiciary required that there be a commission to kind of oversee all that, and the commission was created statutorily. The commission is made up of 10 judges and a representative of the Superior Court courts, all of whom, and I'll kind of emphasize this today, are uncompensated and are serving at the request and the bequest of the Chief Justice. All of these judges serve solely to act for the benefit of the state and its justice system, and all have signed an ethics commitment guaranteeing that all decisions are made for the benefit of the state and no decisions are made that are to benefit any individual member of the commission. In the last 10 years, the legislature has rightly questioned IT expenses in the judiciary, primarily because there seemed to be no coordination in the judiciary for those expenditures. That's basically primarily due, I think y'all should be aware, that the judiciary is really not a unified judiciary. There's no titular head, there's no way to mandate straight through the judiciary a lot of how the operations of the judiciary occur. As a result, the Commission has over the last 5 years focused on utilizing a business approach to controlling IT in the judiciary. The way we have done that is, for the first time, I think, in Georgia history, the Georgia Courts Automation Commission has approached this by establishing a series of strategic business plans for each class of court in the state, and are working on a judiciary-wide business plan. The result is the ability, and the result that benefits the legislature is the ability for the legislature to see clearly for the first time the directions that the third branch of government, the judiciary, is itself going when it comes to what their business approach is. The result is that the legislature will see that the judicial branch has a direction, and that the judicial branch decision making is more or less unified because it is consensus building within these strategic plans. The Commission is taking those judiciary business plans, and from them, because IT serves the business and the operation, has developed for each class of court a strategic IT plan and judiciary-wide IT plan. The result, again, is that the legislature would be assured that request for technology funding by the judiciary is based on a plan and not just sporadic, that it is not a scattered decision-making but a unified decision-making, and that proper state-funded requests are being made, that none of the judicial spending on IT is going to inure to the benefit of individual or local judges, but is, as a part of the overall judiciary-wide plan, would be expenditures that the legislature can be assured inures to the benefit of the entire state and the entire judiciary. The Commission itself has a staff of one individual, and we rely primarily on the private sector because we understand we're judges. We're not business people. Judges are probably not very good business people because they're more like handle it and everybody jumps and handles it, and that's our expectation. And I found, and I've had the same thing happen with my own staff here, is, everything's possible, but what you have to do is sit down and plan what is actually going to be the consequences. That's why we went into a strategic business plan for the Courts Automation Commission. That's why we're high on handling things through a plan, and so that everybody discusses what's to occur rather than what, somebody says, I want this to happen, and everybody says, okay, we'll do it, and they don't even have the staff to do it with, things like that. We are, at this point, working on establishing statewide standards for data collection, for data definitions, for exchanging information, not just among the judiciary, but also communicating all this data with other agencies and being able to gather the data and establish standards for gathering data so that when you get information from the judicial branch, you can be assured we're all talking about the same thing, that whatever Floyd County says is its number of cases or its way of handling things is exactly the same thing in another county. Yes.
To some extent, I don't want to cut you off, but we are on a thing.
Well, I'm sorry.
I want to hear it. We may have to come back a different day. I had issues last year with this. I'm going to ask you one question.
Yes, sir.
What deliverable have we gotten for $800,000 since January of last year?
For $800,000?
What have the citizens of Georgia gotten from, or for a total of $1.4 million since FY05? What deliverable have the citizens of Georgia gotten since last year?
What you have gotten to a large degree is strategic business plans for each council of courts in the state of Georgia. You have got strategic IT plans for each council of the state of Georgia. You have an IT strategic plan for the entire judiciary. And what we have is the plans.
And the average Georgian, the 9,800,000 people out there, I just look at it. The $800,000 is 4 times what a colleague of yours says he needs for senior court judges to move things through the docket. I just want a deliverable. I want to know when the citizens of Georgia are going to have something on the ground other than us paying a consulting company to build PowerPoints to stick in people's offices.
Well, look.
Has anybody acted on any of those strategic plans?
Yeah, in fact, everybody is. The presentations.
Can we line up a meeting next week and you bring some people in that can show me a deliverable where a court...
I'm not real clear exactly what you mean by a deliverable. We're not...
Well, tell me where we would have been had we not spent $800,000 in the last year.
You would be back in the position of not knowing when you got a request from the judiciary about needing computers, about e-filing, and all that kind of stuff. You would be in the position of not knowing whether that was coordinated with any other agency or any other judicial branch. You would be back in the position that we were in 5 years ago.
Who is that you?
The legislature.
Well, see, I've been sitting here all day, and I asked the judiciary branches last year to put a capital plan together and bring it to this committee, whether we could buy it all in 1 year or spread it out. And I have sat here all day, and I have yet to see any one of the judicial branches bring to this committee a plan for capital improvements. And I appreciate the Supreme Court telling me they didn't, or the appeals court saying they didn't have money to repair those. We understand we have that. But they didn't bring a plan to ask us what they needed to put this together. So I'm failing to see where anyone is, I mean, and maybe it's a disconnect between the commission and the courts out there. And I know I'm probably being argumentative here. I apologize, but I'm an IT guy from way back, and it appears we're just spending money to build PowerPoints, and nobody is acting on that.
Well, I can't. That's not true. I can't tell you what say, for example, the state courts have done individually with their business plan. I know that the reports I have.
Nothing, because they don't have an investment in it. I mean,
well, that's not my understanding.
Can you bring me some state court judges that tell me that this makes their life easier? Because I asked for that last January and hadn't seen a single one.
Well, I know they have a plan. My understanding is they're acting on those plans. I know that all of the courts have gotten together. What we've been able to do is bring judges from each class of court to sit down and talk about what their future plans are for the state. Now, the fact that we're in a budget crunch,
we have
and there's
to pay
nothing
somebody
to buy out of that.
$800,000 a year to bring them together and write that plan for us.
Well, that's not all that's been the money's been spent on.
For FY08, we spent $666,327 with North Highland.
Right.
What did we get?
That's not all. We did we did the data definitions.
We did those. We did those last year. Has anybody implemented a system using those? Remember, last year my question was, I know what a data dictionary is, and we can go into this in more detail. I understand planning to plan to. I want to know why the citizens of Georgia are better off in January 2009 after spending $666,000 with a consulting group. I used to be a consultant. I know what that is. I mean, where's the outcome? Where or Court of Appeals made a great point. I mean, they're up there. They try cases. They put them through. You try cases on your bench, and I'm going to ask you the same question: is how much? What has your circuit been able to do to use this?
My circuit, we're not, this planning is statewide planning. It's not for individual counties. We're not spending state money to benefit an individual county. We're trying to get, say, for the juvenile courts to finally sit down and decide how they want to operate their business, what kinds of things they want to accomplish, and how they plan to do that, so that when they do come to the legislature, they don't just come out there saying we're haphazardly just coming up with ideas. We have actually all gotten together and decided this is the kind of direction we want to take, and the funding request is based on a direction that's gone through a strategic plan.
But since 2005, have we had anybody bring us a request for any of those things. Now, I've only been here the last 2 years. This being my third. But have we had? That's my question. Is the end game, as they're developed a plan and an ask and a strategic? I mean, we keep saying we're strategic business plan. That normally yields an end and a pathway to get there. And yet, for the 2 years now, the third year I've been here, nobody has ever brought an ask from this. We just keep getting a slideshow and a plan.
I understand that. I will say that what had occurred originally that has brought this about is what happened is GCAC itself began to deal with strategic plans initially because we were doing IT plans. And we did IT plans among all of the court councils. Those councils came up with their own individual IT plans. I think over the last couple of years there hasn't been any request for additional IT monies. I think what you're finding is that your expenditures from each one of those councils on IT monies has not been one as it has been in the past of individual judges or groups of judges deciding they have some project that they want to get funded by the state, number one. Number two, what happened to us is that in the course of developing IT plans, we recognized that IT serves an overall business plan and an overall operational plan that the judiciary did not have. So over the last year, we have been developing those operational plans so that we can have IT requests actually work from a business plan as opposed to isolated on their own. And we're in the process, and that's basically what's been occurring. The fact that we don't have any money to request and we're not requesting it is probably why you don't have any requests for deliverables at this point. But you do have people thinking about what the future ought to be so that when they do ask for those monies, they will be able to, have some kind of a plan that says to you, this is why we're doing this.
And we clearly, I just have a disconnect with this. I guess I just find that we were here this time last year. And the simple request when you came to the office was, okay, I just want to know what we're doing. I just want to know what we're buying. What we spent $666,000 on in FY08. At that time, we hadn't completed it. We were finishing it. And then the assurance was we got something going. We're going to have these. So we're a year later. What did we get?
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that what I think is the most valuable thing that we've done is worth $666,000. I think that the most valuable thing that we have done is get all the courts to start talking to each other and working together so that when the legislature deals with the courts, there is common communication that's occurring.
Can we do, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we do that without spending $1,400,000 with this consulting company over the last 4 fiscal years? Because I'm having real problems with closing crime labs and you not having enough senior judges to sit in court, and the ask being for $800,000. And I thank Chairman Houston for reaching in and working with Ms. Mitchell to get this information. But to ask for another $800,000 in FY09 when we're talking about, furloughs and closing crime labs and you not having enough judges and the folks over in Piedmont, working on a shoestring budget. I just look at the competition of what did the consultants deliver for. And I'll direct the question to Mr. Nolan. He's running the railroad over there. You're a judge. You're sitting the bench. What are we getting for $666,000? If we coordinated everybody, that's great. We didn't spend the $666,000 on that. What did we pay these consultants? $660,000. Where's my deliverable?
And
so I can take it to Ben Harbin over there and tell him that I don't, I wasn't an idiot last year to let this thing work. So we took it out, and I was convinced that it went back in conference. Okay, you guys got your way. You got it put back in. A bunch of people said, Chuck, trust me, it's going to work out. So I'm a year later. I trusted. What did we get for $166,000?
Well, I can give y'all individual
$666,000. Well, that's simply. I think that's a fair question.
It is. If you don't want me to include the PowerPoints, the plans themselves, and that kind of thing as a deliverable, I'm not too sure exactly I do know that the deliverables are plans that are clear, concise, that can be followed, that have objectives, that have measurables.
That's worth more
that
than
kind of
that's
stuff.
worth. That plan you think is worth more to Georgia
I
than
didn't say that's
1,200
all we
senior
did.
judge
I'm
days.
telling you, what I'm saying is, if that's not a deliverable, then a significant portion of what we're doing is not a deliverable.
Okay, well, if that's
But if that's, if you're looking for other things, then you're getting more into the technical area that I can't get into in terms of data definitions and those kinds of things, and how we're trying to proceed with taking things like meeting with other agencies to talk about, part of what we've done is meet with other agencies to talk about where our disconnects in terms of language and in terms of inaccurate data from the judiciary to all the other government agencies. One of the things we did was have a meeting and start communications and start collaboration with 23 state agencies that get data from the courts and talk about where the disconnects on those data, that data is.
But that wasn't part of the $600,000.
It was.
Okay, well, that's what maybe I'm not asking, and I apologize. I know it's 4:30, and I'm standing between everybody and going home. But what I'm after, if I were you, George, if I were you, knowing the questions I got last year, I would have had 8 copies of everything we got for $600,000, and I would be going over, here's what we got and here's what it did for me. Not for me, but for, to show us what we did for Georgia. And yet I sit here today with nothing. I thought the gentleman here with dispute resolution didn't have documents to hand out, but he talked about his staff of 3 and 2,400 and the number of cases they solved, and he is looking for $196,000 in state money. That's what I'm trying to get. I really just want to see value. I'm a software guy. I've been in the consulting business. But when I look over there, if you're telling me we're paying $600,000, y'all may be doing a great job. But if we're paying $600,000 for this thing and bringing these people together, and it's sitting on state court credenzas, and nobody's doing anything with it, then we don't need to keep funding it. And that's not your fault, but that message needs to go out through ACCG to the state courts and say, if we're going to try to do this to make you better, then use it. That's what I want to. That's what I'm trying to find out. I won't belabor the point any further, but I do think we want to get more into. I want to get more in detail. I'll leave it up. There was another question. Mr. Smith has one.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick question, because I think this kind of goes back to what Chairman Martin is talking about. There are a lot of plans on shelves. We probably have destroyed whole forests with plans. What % of the plan that you're working on, because you've referenced plan probably in every sentence that you've talked about, what % of the plans have been implemented, and what's the drop dead date on when it would be fully implemented?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I think I can give you some details. For example, I can pull up the GCAC plan itself. I can tell you where we are on that plan and probably put some kind of percentage to that. But planning, part of what we have to do is update plans. So,
But if you don't have the plan in place, how are you going to update it?
When you have the plans in place, there are plans that are being reviewed. We've only had these plans for less than 2 years. Mm-hmm. So expecting implementation of a plan, within a year of when you're talking about it, implementation within plans have different dates and different completion times, and long-term objectives and short-term objectives. And so in terms of a pure percentage, I don't know how you measure all that, except that you can take the plan and know that what we're doing is going back to that's part of our challenge, is to take the plan. And, for example, with the juvenile courts, we did an IT plan about 3 years ago with the juvenile court judges. What we're doing is going back and saying, what have you done, how far have you gotten, and what do we need to do to change the plan to make sure that we aren't just spinning our wheels here. Part of our challenge, and the GCAC challenge, is, you're right, not just doing a plan, but part of the expenditure here is to push people who are sitting on the bench and who are handling cases and who don't want to be here any more than I do, and getting them to sit together and operate as a group. This is I want to be honest, it's a group of dictators who care only about their little courtroom. And we're trying to get them to help you know how these state monies ought to be expended on IT. And that's more than, just paperwork. It is an effort to getting them together, getting them all to participate and spend the time. We have a real battle in trying to find 2 or 3 days that we can sit down a group of judges from the council and say, let's talk about what you ought to be doing and what needs to be done here. And so, part of our battle here as a commission is to get all this kind of stuff not only started but on a move. And so your expenditures are to try and get these people together. We have to pay these folks to travel and that kind of stuff to sit down. But we've been really successful in getting judges to participate when they don't have to. They don't have any, they're doing this purely as this is good for the judiciary in the state of Georgia, to sit down and talk about how we ought to operate and how we ought to do IT. It costs money to do that.
Okay.
Your Honor, we don't normally finance state courts through the General Assembly, do we? That's usually done by the counties.
No, I think
local,
there's some
right. Do you feel that maybe the commission that was created, it looks like according to statute, it was created in 1991 when, I think that's about the time I first came on the internet and got email a couple of years before that.
Right.
Do you think perhaps it might have outlived its usefulness by now?
Actually, the commission, as originally operating up until probably 5 years ago, had pretty much taken over a goal and the way of doing things that was more like an agency, like a state agency. And what happened 5 years ago when we started changing the operation of the commission is that we decided we ought to be a policy-making operation as opposed to trying to, to be the operator who says, okay, here, Superior Court, here's your software, and we're going to make sure you've got funding for that, and we're going to make sure that you've got technical support and that kind of stuff, which is what the commission was doing. Mm-hmm. We backed off, and our budget went down the way it did because we decided that the thing we needed to do was to talk about how to standardize what everybody was doing so that the complaint of the state about we're spending money, in this class of court to do something that's not even compatible with what that class of court is doing, and those courts are not going to be able to even communicate with each other, and the state's not going to be able to get any information. We're trying to sit down and set policy and operations and put together a plan that allows the judiciary to use technology in such a way as that there's some consistency to what's going on.
All right. Let me, if you don't mind, I'd like to read the very last part of the statute that enables you, where it says, nothing in this article shall be so construed as to require any office of a court to accept additional workload generated by establishment of electronic transfer of information capability from any other office of the county or local government, including court offices. Each such office shall continue to have sole responsibility for transmitting information required of it, either manually or electrically. So if we have that provision in statute, and you are asked by statute to promulgate rules and regs, but yet you've got this disclaimer in the back saying that no one even has to follow what you implement and decide on. So we've got kind of, what is the point of the commission if you can't make the courts do what you suggest for $800,000 a year?
It is, that's actually, to be honest, probably why it's costing so much, is that we're having to try and cajole and organize and bring people together that aren't by statute required to do so. So in order for the technology of the state of Georgia in the judiciary to have some sense to it so that it's not scattered all over creation, we're trying to put everybody together and create a scenario where we can do that for you.
I understand that, Your Honor, and by the statute, it looks like you're living up to what we have mandated that you do.
Right.
However, I'm afraid that because this law was passed originally in 1991, last updated in 2001, we're now in 2009. Lord knows technology changes every 2 months, much less in 9 years. It is my personal opinion, I think that the Commission's outlived its usefulness, and quite frankly, I think it's our second repeal bill we've discovered today, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sure we'll have more conversation. I'm going to suggest if, and I know, Judge, you've got a court to set, so I don't expect you to have to do this, but I'm going to suggest we slide this and get into the more details of it, give Mr. Nolan an opportunity to try to respond to some of the queries that we got. But I do agree with Mr. Chairman Chambers from 1991 to 2001, it seems like this was created, headed toward the Y2K thing, trying to get people to get on board. And I still go back, and if it's the state court's fault for not doing it again, we don't fund state courts at the state.
Well, I was just using that as an example.
We have since 1991 and since 2001, we created that thing across the street that now is about to cost us an extra $14 million to outsource called GTA. We created those guys to help us buy this sort of stuff, and it appears they never got involved in this piece of the process. They got involved in everything else, and now we've got over there where we've got two companies that are going to outsource it for us and cost us $14 million more than it's doing now for the rest of this year, so I'm not sure that's a real good buy either. That's for a different discussion for a different day, but let's talk about this. I fear you're working real hard. If we just assume you're working real hard and the Highlands Group's giving us the things we want, it's going on somebody's desk and nothing's getting done. And in any budgetary time, especially these, I'm not for doing that anymore. Now, subject to being overruled or my mind changed, but I'd rather take that $600,000 and give you 12 senior judges days, and I'm not even a great fan of using senior judges. And I would rather do that. So
I won't go there either.
Well, I understand. No, they have their needs. I mean, we've had an odd experience with one down here in my area.
Now, the advantage to GCAC and as it's composed right now is you're not paying for the leadership right now, and you're also the way we've operated is to use private vendors to advise us as opposed to thinking judges can think this thing through. We are project oriented. It isn't like projects can't be spread out, and it isn't like you can't do that kind of thing. The question is if you want any kind of coordination, because you don't have a chief justice like in some states that can say you're all going to use this computer program and you're all going to do it the same way, then you got to have some mechanism for getting everybody to work together on it, and that's what GCAT's trying to do.
I got you, but we've spent $1.4 million to do it. They appear not to be using it, and by statute
we're
they don't.
Still early on.
Well, by statute they're not required to do it, so we either need to fix the statute and require them to work with you.
And I'll agree with you. One of the biggest problems we face is the fact that we can't mandate a lot of this, and that's where we have to look at you. And we've talked about that as a method of trying to solve part of the problem.
Okay.
That's the dangerous loophole.
Well, I appreciate you putting up with me today. I mean, I know you're
I just want
a legal scholar and not an IT guy. But if it pleases the committee, and if you don't mind, again, we don't expect you to have to get back. We can use that by phone. We'll get with Mr. Nolan and try to get there. And I suggest, Mr. Nolan, because it's been some pretty tough questions, I'd haul the vendor in here that you spent $600,000 with and let them try to justify.
I know that as a commission we have seen that kind of thing. So I mean when we meet, we review exactly our own strategic plan, and we have asked them to tell us where they are. And I know they've done the, Microsoft, worksheet or whatever this, it's not Office, it's a
project plan.
No. It's a
Gantt chart, or are you talking about project plan?
Yeah, some management program where they track where they're 40% complete on this project.
Well, I hope they got a real good one to show us for $600,000.
They impressed us. I don't know that they'll impress you.
If you wish, Representative Powell was here when this came when I was back in grammar school.
And I take that as a compliment also. And what I'm fixing to say, a lot of people don't like to talk about a lot of the members of the legislature, especially those in the past who were attorneys who had to deal with all of you distinguished jurists out there. Didn't want to talk about the unspoken truth of a lot of things. But back in the old days, nobody knew a whole lot about technology. But they certainly knew about judicial egos. I mean, and I'm just going to sort of say it the way it is and see if it sort of helps define a little bit. A lot of those folks over the years, back when the majority leader was an attorney and everybody in the chairmanship positions and Speaker Murphy and everybody, nobody had a real good grip on technology. Everybody sort of felt like we were getting our britches pulled down and we were getting one stuck to us. And, you know, we didn't know. And then you had a secondary problem. And that secondary problem was that, you know, and I don't mean this disrespectful in case I ever have to appear in front of any of you judges, but on every one of the levels of the judiciary, from the lower courts, the inferior courts, to the upper courts, nobody could get along. You all had your handlers, you all had your officers, you all had your commissions. And then there was a realization prior to Y2K, a few years prior. And a lot of y'all might remember that scare when we woke up one day in the state of Georgia and we realized that something had been perpetrated on the taxpayers and the legislators and the administrations of the past, that nothing was compatible. Everybody had, every department, every division had computers, they had programs, but nothing was interoperable. And that was at the point that there was more money being churned into the automated commission to basically try to be a clearinghouse. Now, the Judicial Council walks on eggshells because they only exist to try to keep peace in the judicial family. And that pretty well is about the way I can say it, in that this automated commission, and I'm not going to say that they didn't certainly get tons of money at that time, but their whole role was basically to try to be the implementer to create a family atmosphere so that everybody could drink out of the same loving cup with technology. So they didn't wake up one day and there was nothing that was not in sync that could work together. Then you had a few other things that was thrown out there over the years, like some of the other councils that went out on their own, and they were basically creating a system of their own. And that's basically the background from my aged historical perception of this. And that's what the purpose of this was. There was one talk several years ago about what would it take to bring all of the judiciary to the table. Give them a spoon and stick it in all of them's mouth to make them like it. But, as you understand, there's so many attorneys in the General Assembly who practice in front of these judges that there's a lot of walking on eggshells. So that's what, in general, this is about, to try to create a system of someone who, or a group who can understand to try to be diplomatic in dealing with all those various levels of the judiciary.
I could, you know,
the
accomplishment alone on my part of getting judges from every class of court to sit down and even have the discussions and to say we want to work together, and then to move that up to the Judicial Council itself, is worth an expenditure. You know, how much is up to y'all, but it is an accomplishment that I feel proud about that this commission has done. And, you know, whether that's worth expending money on in the long run, that's y'all's decision. But I think it's worth a lot for this group that we have been able to get people to sit down and talk about what they intend to do as a group as opposed to what they intend to do as individuals.
I thought I was pretty delicate, Judge, don't you think?
I'm not delicate. I'm a juvenile court judge, and the only elected juvenile court judge in the state.
Not all.
I don't answer to anybody but me and my constituency.
You should be a superior. Then it sounds to me like you're really a superior court judge instead of a juvie judge.
Well, they sometimes get mad at me for acting that way, but.
Judge, again, we thank you. I think we the last few minutes helps me understand, even further that if this is to drag the horses to water and try to make them drink and spend a lot of money doing it. And, I guess, again, to Mr. Nolan, I would like to see, the folks that are helping you with whom you're spending the money might not be a good conversation to have, and to just evaluate the whole process, because you can do the meeting and pulling those people together. Of the money we're spending with that consult. I mean, are they? Last question: are they facilitating the meetings for you?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I want to say. I mean, I'd love to know the hourly rate and some things we're spending on those sorts of things. Just the deliverable, and I know you said it's a PowerPoint, but it just where the contract is, who we're paying for what, because I mean that's a considerable amount of money.
This commission has demanded that of those folks all along. We're not sitting back and letting those folks just say they're doing things. I see, of course, I'm probably easily impressed on technology because I don't know squat, but when it comes down to it, that's one of the things I have demanded all along, is that we not only have contracts, but his job is to monitor that we're actually getting what we're paying for and what they said they do. And what I see when I get a presentation is, here's where we are, and it's all pretty kind of stuff, but I can tell you, by graphs, trying to get it to explain to 10 judges, here's the green, here's what we've accomplished, here's what's yet to do, that kind of thing. We've been getting that kind of thing, okay. So we should be able to give it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Done with.
No, not for today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Husband, we're just warmed up. No, we're just warmed up.
I'm scared.
Do we have time to get to everything you need to get to?
Yes.
I don't want to rush you, but and I know people that are with you have been sitting here for 3 hours.
I know, and if you'll let me go over
yes,
some
ma'am.
of the handouts that I brought, then I think they're pretty self-explanatory. And then if you all have questions individually, I'll be more than happy to come and sit down with you and talk about what your questions. On the second page of the handout that's stapled,
yes, ma'am.
We have listed out all of the budget units that are under judicial counsel and what the 6% and 8% cuts will be. Behind that, and I'll just go over briefly with you, we've listed out the detail for what our 6% and 8% cuts would be within the AOC. And you can see we're eliminating and freezing positions. In FY08 through the end of what we anticipate the end of FY09, we will have lost over 11% of our staff. So we have been steadily eliminating, freezing, and eliminating positions over the last 2 fiscal years. You'll see there we've outlined where those savings are going to be for the 6% and 8%. On the second page, that it looks like a little chart here. The other agencies within the Judicial Council budget have listed out the detail of how they're arriving at the 6% and 8% cuts. So we tried to provide you some information. I know you didn't want to just say, okay, it's across the board, we're taking it out of operating, so we've tried to let you know how we're going to arrive at those 6% and 8% cuts. Are there any questions for me? I know y'all have had a long day. I'm more than happy to go over each line item, but it's your pleasure.
Committee have any questions? I for the record, I like the way you presented the information to the committee. I just specifically where you got the statewide changes in there, it gives the committee members an opportunity to look at how that foots across the page. Let me ask you this question: what finance payroll functions, if any, do you have within your agency?
We have the full range of finance and payroll, and we handle that for a number of judicial agencies. All of the agencies that are listed under the Judicial Council, some local ADR programs, and other judicial branch agencies. And so we handle a good number of grants.
Specifically payroll. You do that?
Yes, we do.
How many people do you pay?
How many people, Randy, how many do we have on our payroll?
In total, probably around 130.
Okay.
We handle the payroll for just 130 employees, including all the attached agencies. 130.
I'm going to go back to the same thing with we now, at least today, have seen that the Court of Appeals has a payroll function. The Supreme Court has a payroll function. You have a payroll function. Again, I'm not after
Superior
anybody
courts
further.
have a payroll
Exactly.
function.
I mean, the DAs, I'm going to guess, have a payroll function. It would seem that we could have one payroll function. We can talk about that later. I mean, would that
Yes.
not work? Okay. I'm just. I have to
understand.
ask that question. I wonder if the House has a payroll function and the Senate has a payroll. I guess we have we have the fiscal office that does it. Okay. Okay. Any further questions? I know we just. And I apologize.
Again, I'm available
Yeah.
and I'm around if y'all.
And we will want to do that. I want to go back into the base budgets of some of these programs, and I know Ms. Mitchell has done that with you. But I know we still have at least two agencies. Yeah, I think we don't have DAs and
Yes.
PAC and the juvenile court.
I'm available.
So if we do that, we'll
anything you wanna
move
look
on
at.
forward if the committee doesn't have any questions. Thank you, Ms. Nesbitt.
Thank you.
Aren't the DAs glad we took all that time with the Judicial Council? Think of it this way. Sir.
Chairman, I hope to get back to the God's country, Brunswick Judicial Circuit, which were 78 degrees when I left yesterday afternoon, and sunny. So
we're thinking about holding our next meeting down there.
I would suggest that it would save a lot on heating.
Yes, sir.
By holding it down at the beach.
We're on page 9 of 59, ladies and gentlemen.
Chairman, the district attorneys are created by the Constitution. There are 49 district attorneys created by the Constitution, and our duties as district attorneys, as elected, we represent basically the entire state with these 49 judicial circuits. We prosecute all criminal cases that arise in Superior Court. Most of those would be felonies. It's really kind of where the rubber meets the road in the criminal justice process. We also handle appeals to the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court from these criminal cases. We handle juvenile court. We handle forfeitures, which can involve RICO, drug forfeitures, gambling forfeitures. We handle. We also, of course, are the attorney for the grand juries. We're in charge of doing the child fatality review. We're in charge of doing child protocol review. And there's numerous other duties that I could probably stand here and talk out for a long time that the district attorneys, which basically are kind of the people's lawyer on a local level across the state. Our business has, you'll hear some statistics. This particular crime is down 3%. Well, if it wasn't up already 300% over the last 20 years, that might mean something. Actually, from from 2000 to 2007, on the offenses that we track. And these are the ones that FBI, GBI really track. Murders have been up 43%, rape 23%, aggravated assault 17%, robberies is up 44%, property crimes are up 20%. And this is where, as district attorneys, we meet into the criminal justice system. It kind of dovetails with law enforcement, sheriffs, chiefs of police, the jails. There are approximately 25,000 inmates right now in our county jails awaiting some type of resolution of their case. Majority of those are going to be felonies because most the jails are pretty overcrowded, and we don't keep a lot of misdemeanors in our jails, unless they're maybe like a DUI or whatever. We have some interesting issues that we have to deal with that are statutorily created. We have when a person is arrested and they're in jail, we have 90 days to get them to the grand jury, or they are entitled to a bond. It doesn't mean they'll make the bond, but they're certainly entitled to that bond. We also have speedy trial, which on most felonies is 2 terms. In my particular circuit in Brunswick, I have over 3,000 pending cases for my staff at any given time. I have approximately 25 murder cases, not including the triple homicide I had 3 or 4 weeks ago, and a 2-year-old that was murdered this weekend. But this is kind of what district attorneys do around the state. When we had the budget crisis as district attorneys, we went to an immediate in August to 1-day furlough per month. So some people have praised us for that. Some people have criticized us for that. We feel like we made the right decision in that. We would like to keep it at 1 day per month. Our cuts right now in our amended budget call for 13 furlough days, which would mean in about a month we'd have to start going to 2 furlough days per month.
Look,
yes, sir.
I want to interrupt you, and if I can,
Sure.
and tell you I appreciate that. The proactive stance that you folks have taken ahead of a major component of the state budget during the budget hearing said that he was philosophically opposed to furloughs, and I thought I didn't. Sometimes Speaker Richards said you think and you don't say, and I thought, well, you were probably philosophically opposed to them, but you had to do that to help Georgia get through this, and people will say that, and you will probably say later in your presentation, I'm not trying to cut you off, but you'll probably say it caused your throughput to go down some, and I'm sure it does if you don't have anybody there, but the truth of the matter is I think those ADAs would have taken a day off on vacation or whatever, sometime, maybe not a day off. They were taking some time off. Anyway, I just want to tell you I appreciate that. I was at your
I appreciate that.
Your gathering when your colleagues, and I told you that then, and I'll tell you again now. It's not something that we wanted to do, but I just, part of me says that those folks that did that understand. They get it. As a good friend of mine says, that they get it, and they're probably working a little harder and a little faster when they get back in there to get at the
Certainly, yeah.
And I appreciate it.
Our caseload, the criminals don't, just because we furlough, the criminals haven't been furloughing. And I just, of course, I have a lot of my district attorneys here, and if they raise their hand, and so elected DAs in Pasadena, our victim assistance people, we have several people here from victim assistance, and so we'd like to, we all appreciate that. And in this situation, we have in our budget here, the prosecuting attorney, the 6% cut for district attorneys comes from 13 furlough days. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the district attorney's portion just consists of salaries and a little bit of 2% of travel, 98. So there really is nothing, if you're out of that program, you would nothing to do. Prosecuting Attorneys Council, we have taken 18 not including the health stuff. But if my math is correct, we've done about 18.3%. Not even including it'd be more than that, cuts off of Prosecuting Attorneys Council. So we tried to take as deep a cuts as we could there. On the district attorneys, we did cut the travel by, on line 10, we had cut it by $103,000. Line 11, we have deferred any kind of steps and promotions for district attorneys. District attorneys are given one assistant district attorney per Superior Court judge, plus two secretaries and one investigator. That is our statutory allotment. District attorneys decide, the statute, Georgia law decides whether or not somebody is eligible for an increase as they're a career prosecutor, and then if they perform satisfactorily, then the district attorney can approve or disapprove of that. It's not really a council function, so that's why we use the word defer on the steps for ADAs because of this time. Of course, we talked about the 13 furlough days, and the next was, of course, the shortfall in personnel services, which we had some discussion with at the joint meeting. That figure apparently is mainly unfunded, unknown future liabilities that we occur in the district attorney's office and in the district attorney's side of the budget. The DHR is a federal grant. It's just in and out, so it really has no effect on the state budget. The cuts that we made in the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council is an agency created by state law that it says that they shall assist the district attorneys in doing our fiscal matters, prepare our budgets, our human resources, our CLE, our training. These mandatory things. Yes, we do have. We were for about 20 years in Superior Court's payroll, and then last year we were asked, I guess, to have our own payroll. So we have one person who does our payroll for about 800 folks around the state. We had five. The line 14 says we deleted filling 4 positions. That's actually 5 at this point. That's a typo. That's actually 5. That is several attorneys, an IT person, victim witness. Line 15 is supplies. We have gone through and tried to cut out every stamp copy paper. On training, we have, instead of giving out handouts at training, we put it on the website and they can download it and print it in their own office. That savings came to $106,807. We've a lot of our computer equipment around the state that for doing our servers, that doing our state server tracker, our database is $208,000. We just cut that out completely. There were some operating expenses for our victim assistance director, who was one of the positions that was left vacant, so that was a $25,000. Furloughs for the prosecuting attorney's council employees is $187,000, and deferring steps is $11,000. So all those, come to the 18.3%. I guess as far as district attorneys go, the main thing that I'm concerned about is being such a unique agency where we're a hybrid, where we only, as district attorney, the state pays about 20% of my budget down in the Brunswick Judicial Circuit. The rest comes from the counties and other funds. And so, it's been pretty, one day a month is manageable. When you start hitting 2 days a month, it gets very difficult. For about 14 or so of our judicial circuits that have nothing but state employees, shutting them down for 2 days a month, shutting the whole DA's office for 2 days a month is pretty tough. If we had to go to about 6 days per 2%, if we went to 8%, that would be 19 days. If we had to go to 10% cuts, we'd be shutting a large portion of the state judicial system down for 25 days a year, and that's pretty tough. We would like to. We knew we had to do our part, and we feel like, of course, as DAs, 1 day per month, a furlough is manageable, and would hope that we could have enough in the budget to keep it at 1 day per month. Any questions?
We hope for that. We hope for that as well. And I did have a question on the prosecuting attorneys council. The 8.2.14, the defer filling those. You said it's listed as 4, but it's 5, and I see the description. Yeah. We didn't approve those positions new last year, right? Had those been approved?
Those are only one of those was
right.
An IT position was a new position,
right?
And so that was gone, and then of course the others were historical positions, been there for quite a while.
Where'd that money go last year? Did that lapse?
No, that was new money for 2009.
Well, if those positions were there, they
started in July this year.
Okay, so but we didn't fund all 5 of those new positions last year.
No. Only one was new money.
Right. So if those
actually there were 2 new positions. One we filled, one we did not fill, and that was to work with our case management system, the tracker
right.
system.
But I'm getting we didn't add any attorneys. There were 4 attorneys in there. So if those attorneys were vacant for FY08, what was this?
They were not vacant.
No,
they became vacant. All right, that's what I was getting. I didn't know
one was retirement.
I didn't know if that was part of the money. I mean,
one
governor
transfer
talked about
to
the $200-some million that lapped back from agencies. If that was part of that.
No, sir. That's
the one thing we don't get. We talked about, and Chairman Houseman will have that committee. Chairman Royal had it of actual versus budget when you came in after the session with Budget and Fiscal Affairs Oversight.
In fact, one of those positions was vacant this summer, and he's still on the payroll. He just got retirement disability, so we just have not filled.
Okay. All right. Do we have further questions? Do we have additional questions for the prosecuting attorneys? Yeah. I have some detailed questions, sort of the top line budget, and we can go all the way back to zero base, but we will not keep everyone here this.
Be happy to meet with you in detail on that. I know exactly what you're talking
about. At a later time. You're not recognized for that purpose yet.
Absolutely, and I tried to go as fast as I could. Thank you very, very much.
I think juvenile courts. See what you. Thank you.
Hey, that's okay. I have a big audience to speak for. Page 8. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us here today, and committee members as well. Ours is pretty small. We just have the standard cuts. The additional cut, the 6% is the grants from counties. That's the $97,001. Pretty much that's, huh?
I was just saying we should have definitely done this in reverse order, and
That's
you guys would have
okay.
saved 3.5 hours of your time. I apologize.
We enjoyed it.
We need to.
It was
Yeah,
great. I'm sorry, that's the grand total. The only thing I mentioned was the 6%. That was the $97,001 reduction, and that's the grants to counties.
The rest of the money there is the reduction in state health benefit plan in the reduction of the reserve that we're taking statewide.
I apologize. I should have mentioned that. Those are the standard cuts that are throughout all agencies. And if anybody has any questions. Hey, I'm dessert for a long, big meal.
And seriously, I apologize. We should.
No, it's fine.
Kendra, you should beat me about the head and shoulders for not picking a better batting order and getting the folks with a more concise. I won't say shorter, but more concise at the beginning. So, do you have any commissions you need to speak about today?
No.
That's good. Seriously, do we have any? We won't belabor this. So we appreciate it. Let me ask you this because I failed to I mentioned it earlier, and I'll actually get a memo out to the agencies. But we did ask last year for everyone to sort of prepare an automation, an IT budget. This is no time that we could fill it, but I want to keep, with the budget situation, I want to keep that out there that. If you have needs or you project needs or you're, and I'll get a note out from the committee to the agencies about that, because that is something we talked about last year, if you recall, of being sort of proactive and helping us build that into a plan. So if you would do that, and then I know you're, everybody's lean and mean, but if we had to get some more money or furloughs an option, can you provide us a plan? I mean, nobody wants to do them, and we hope we don't have to. But if you could just get with Ms. Mitchell and provide, if we had to do that and had to just go for every dollar we have, the ones that we could do that would have the least impact on the services you deliver for folks.
We've actually have met with the staff, told all the staff to be prepared to take a day of furlough or a couple of days of furlough. We are prepared.
And I appreciate it. And again, and everybody's gone. But I'll say this again: when I had the conversation with somebody recently, they said, "But how am I to run the agency if I have to do furloughs?" And the question was, did nobody take a day off in December? And everybody had a week off. Well, the agency ran. I mean, right. I know it's taking money out of people's pockets. I know people. And we don't have to do that, by the way. Mm-hmm. We don't have to have the furlough on the same day. It can be a roll. But right, and that's what I'm speaking of. We don't want to shut you down, but these are dire times. So we appreciate you guys and appreciate the conciseness of your presentation. Are there any questions? No. If there are none, we thank you very much. Remind the committee that we have another gathering 2 o'clock on Monday.
Look how happy they are.
We have another gathering at 2 o'clock on Monday where we will hear from some of the attached agencies to public safety that we have not heard from, and we will have detailed presentation for DOC, the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Juvenile Justice. They have considerable detail in their budget. There was considerable question about some of the programs they were cutting, and so we'll give them, the committee members that are interested, an opportunity to delve down in that little detail. I am not sure the room for that. We kind of add. We add.
You've got a room assigned.
It's 403 in the state capitol.
Yeah, we will also talk about the move to tip, but we're going to do that at 403 at the Capitol, so we can be a little bit more around the table, but also Monday at 2. But we'll also have an opportunity for our audience. If there's no further business before the committee, we'll stand adjourned. Without objection, we're adjourned.